Chapter 807. Hey, you're finally here. Let's go back to the hotel to rest first. Then we'll come back tomorrow. Looking at Jiang Hai's group driving over, Pra Walton in the distance also greeted them with a smile. Beside her, there were several people Jiang Hai was familiar with, such as Fail Ferrio, Colin Bavlovich, Barbara Martina, and Cheryl Lee. Except for Isabelle Loren, who still had to take care of the company, everyone else had already arrived. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also understood the meaning in their eyes, so he said with a smile, "Okay, let's see tomorrow." Naturally, since Jiang Hai said so, his men would not disagree with Jiang Hai at this time. After laughing, they felt a little tired, so they took the group to the best hotel near the bull market. Pra Walton had already booked the rooms at this time, 1 suite and 2 standard rooms. The standard rooms were prepared for Robbins Garcia and Burke Dollar, who came with Jiang Hai. As for the suite, as soon as they walked into the suite, Pra Walton had already turned around and kissed Jiang Hai. She tiptoed lightly, and her lips were pressed on Jiang Hai's lips. Her tongue invaded instantly, challenging the friction and the flames of war. "Do you know how long I've been waiting? You bastard, you didn't come to Atlantic City to see me." Their lips parted for a long time. Pra Walton's eyes were about to burst into flames. She looked anxiously at Jiang Hai and said loudly. At the same time, her hands were also taking off Jiang Hai's clothes. Feeling her wildness, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile bitterly. It seemed that a fierce battle was inevitable today, but fortunately, he was already prepared. In such a battle, he was really not afraid of anyone. Since Pra Walton wanted to fight, then he would fight. He was so tough. Soon, the clothes on the two disappeared without them noticing. When Jiang Hai was about to counterattack, Pra Walton suddenly frowned, then patted Jiang Hai's chest. "What's the smell on you?" Looking at Jiang Hai, Pra Walton complained. She can accept Jiang Hai, but in essence, she still likes women, so if it was just Jiang Hai's smell, she could tolerate it and even enjoy it. But at this time, the smell on Jiang Hai's body was really strong, so she couldn't help but frown. "I'm full of sweat and tobacco smell, I'll go wash up first, wait a minute." Hearing Pra Walton's words, Jiang Hai also smelled. He came here in a car with Robbins Garcia and Burke Dollar. They didn't come here to pull cattle, but to choose cattle, so they only drove an F-750. Cowboys were heavy smokers, so naturally, they smoked a lot in the car, and it was impossible to close the windows to smoke, so the windows had to be open, so Jiang Hai's body smelled a lot of smoke and sweat. Now that Pra Walton said so, Jiang Hai was also ready to wash up. "Go." She patted Jiang Hai and pointed to the bathroom. Then Jiang Hai walked in with a smile, turned on the shower, and let the warm water flow on his body. Jiang Hai also let out a long breath. Jiang Hai liked to take baths, at least he thought so. If the weather was good, he would take a bath twice a day. When the weather was cold, even if it was winter, he would take a bath. But now, he didn't have time to take a bath. After quickly washing his hair and applying body soap, he left the bathroom. When he walked into the room, his eyes almost popped out. Because at this time, Pra Walton was already in a mess with her girls. Fail was licking her indescribable place, Colin and Barbara were attacking her 2 indescribable places, and Cheryl was kissing her passionately. Their hands were also on each other's body, and they kept coughing. When Jiang Hai saw this, the fire that was extinguished because of the shower instantly reignited. Seeing this, he didn't hold back and directly walked into the room, pulled Cheryl up, and kissed her on the lips. Pra Walton didn't mind, she looked at one of Jiang Hai's indescribable places and kissed it. This was a toy she wanted for a long time. After a long time, the 3 separated. Jiang Hai went to the bed and drove Fail away, and directly carried Pra Walton. The battle began. Half an hour later, Pra Walton was defeated. Jiang Hai and Cheryl fought again. Then, Colin, Fail, Barbara, and Jiang Hai naturally wouldn't let them go. After a round of fighting, Pra Walton recovered and the battle resumed. When the sounds in the room were completely extinguished, it was already late at night. Jiang Hai stayed in Pra Walton's body and hugged her to sleep. Pra Walton was very satisfied at this time, the corner of her mouth slightly raised, indicating that she really liked this feeling. Unknowingly, the sky gradually turned bright. Jiang Hai was woken up, and the way to wake him up was to say good morning. Thale, Cheryl, Colin, and Barbara didn't care about the mixed smell of Jiang Hai and Pra Walton at all. In fact, for them, these two smells were very familiar and they liked it very much. However, Pra Walton didn't like this mixed smell, so she just lay beside Jiang Hai and looked at Jiang Hai. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai naturally wouldn't allow himself to be captured without putting up a fight. Sometimes, this was how wars started. But fortunately, everyone knew that they still had things to do today, so they didn't go too crazy. At around 10 o'clock in the morning, Jiang Hai and the others had already packed up and changed into new clothes. They opened the door and went downstairs to the buffet restaurant to have a meal. After that, they met up with Robbins Garcia and Burke Dollar, who had already gone to the bull market. My people have analyzed the energy of your pasture. Your pasture is really good stuff. If you only let Angus cows absorb it, they won't be able to absorb it completely. After all, this kind of cow is huge. So, you can try to buy some bigger cows. They'll eat about the same amount of pasture, but they'll produce more meat. After everyone met up, Pra Walton seemed to have forgotten what happened last night and this morning. She returned to her cold and elegant state. Today, she wore a black gauze blouse and a pair of black gauze trousers. The trousers were very loose. Her body was draped in a woman's suit that was specially made for draping, not for wearing. Her face was painted with light makeup. Her hands were crossed in front of her as she spoke to Jiang Hai with a cold and elegant face. She wasn't Jiang Hai's woman now. She represented the Walmart group. When she said that she wanted to watch Jiang Hai buy cows, she naturally prepared her own materials and analysis. Pra Walton wasn't the kind of person who would just sit around and do nothing. I know, but no matter what, we have to prioritize stability. So this year, I'm going to buy 20,000 Angus cows and 15,000 other cows. Even if there's an accident, I'll still have beef to sell. Hearing Pra Walton's words, Jiang Hai smiled and said seriously. This was also the result of his discussion with Robbins Garcia. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Pra Walton didn't say anything. She also thought that it was safer to do this. A true master wasn't about who had the guts or who had the spirit to gamble, but who had the smallest loophole and who could persist for the longest time. Sometimes, some people said that stagnating was not retreating. But for Jiang Hai, stagnating was actually the greatest progress. Because he was already earning a lot, he didn't need to work hard to make money. He only needed to wait patiently. Sometimes, being too ambitious wasn't a good thing. At least, Jiang Hai didn't like to take risks. Boss, Burke and I just took a look. The beef cows here are indeed much better than those in Massachusetts. Let's go in and take a look. Hearing that Pra Walton didn't object to Jiang Hai's words, Robbins Garcia couldn't help but smile and say. Jiang Hai could insist on discussing countermeasures with them. This was also an affirmation to them. He was indeed very happy. After hearing his words, Jiang Hai and the others also officially entered the bull market in front of them. As soon as they walked in, Jiang Hai couldn't help but exclaim because this bull market was really big. After ordering to buy beef cows, Jiang Hai and the others originally wanted to go to the bull market in Massachusetts to take a look. It was only the middle of September now. It was just right to go there to see the cows. The time to buy cows was divided into two periods, March and September. March was called the spring calves. Basically, they were buying calves. Cows were pregnant for 9 months. When the weather began to warm up in March and April, it was also the time for cows to breed. Spring was also the time for all things to do. A cow's gestation period was 270 days, which was 9 months. Mating took place in April, and the calf would be born in January or February of the following year. If the calf did not die prematurely, it would be the time to sell the calf. September was the time to buy the big calves. September, October, and November were the 3 months when the big calves would eat fiercely. In December, they would start to fatten up. Before March of the following year, this batch of cows could be sold. Jiang Hai wasn't the kind of person to buy calves because it was troublesome. Calves were like naughty children. They weren't that obedient. Moreover, calves were stubborn and strong. It was really difficult to control them. Although the cost had decreased, Jiang Hai never bought calves. He couldn't do anything about the calves that were born, but he wouldn't buy them. He originally thought that all bull markets in the world were similar, but now he knew that he was really naive. Chapter 808. Yes, Jiang Hai and the others were not in Massachusetts. They were in New Hampshire. Speaking of this state, it was estimated that 99 out of 100 Chinese people did not know about this state. Indeed, there was nothing much to introduce about this state. It was a very small state with an underdeveloped economy and a small population. There were also no historical events and so on. The main honor of this state was the New England region. The so-called New England region referred to the northeast corner of the United States. It was originally a British colony and also the birthplace of the United States. However, the center of that region was Boston. This New Hampshire was really a state with no sense of existence. In 2011, the state's GDP was only $63.5 billion, ranking 42nd among the 50 states in the United States. This was indeed a very poor state. The state's biggest source of income was the export of printers, photocopiers, and the like. In the local economy, the most important part was its animal husbandry. To be exact, it was dairy husbandry because it was also one of the largest dairy farms in the United States. There were 5 types of cattle. People who had some understanding of cattle knew that the chromosomes of these cattle were different. Ordinary cattle, yaks, bison, buffalo, and yellow cattle. After domestication, cattle were also divided into 4 types: dairy breeds, meat breeds, part-time breeds, and labor breeds. Among them, the most famous labor breeds were Wuxia's buffalo and yellow cattle. Why was Wuxia able to become the world's most powerful country before the development of machine civilization? First, it was because of the number of people and intelligence. Second, it was because of the cattle. Compared to European cattle, Wuxia cattle were more resistant to rough feeding and more durable. They worked more and ate worse. Naturally, the crops they grew were guaranteed. In that era, cattle were important tools, not for eating. European cattle were more suitable for eating than working. It was precisely because of this that Wuxia was so strong. But later, it was all machines that were doing the work. Cattle that were used for labor had almost no place to be used. Cattle that could work were now useless and worthless. This was one of the reasons why cattle that were used for labor were eliminated. The bull market in New Hampshire was the biggest bull market in New England. In the past, Jiang Hai had only heard of it, but he had never been here before. Now that he had walked in, he really felt like his horizons had been broadened. In the past, when he didn't know anything about cows, he felt that all cows were about the same. They were just divided into big cows, small cows, bulls, cows, and so on. But now, as soon as he walked in, he found that it was really an eye-opener. In fact, he hadn't gone to the bull markets in Texas and Montana yet. After going there, he knew what it meant to have a lot of variety. The New Hampshire cattle market was divided into 3 areas: the dairy area, the beef area, and the mixed-use area. Jiang Hai walked into the dairy area first. At present, dairy cows were more popular than beef cows in the world because the consumption of milk was greater. You don't have to eat beef cows, but you have to eat milk no matter which country you are from. You have to take the civilian route, so naturally, you don't have to worry about the sales. Just like Wuxia had a lot of dairy cows, but the milk produced was not enough for China's consumption. There were many dairy factories in China, and everyone knew how much milk was in their dairy products. But milk was calcium supplements, and it was under the control of the country. The price couldn't be raised. Moreover, most of the dairy cows in China were raised by small families. Compared to the big countries in Europe and the United States, it was a lot worse. There was a time when people in China were disgusted with France. It was probably because the French said that they would rather throw away their excess milk than give it to Wuxia people who were in a milk crisis. Also, because of the 2008 Olympics, they boycotted France. But to be honest, in Europe, there were almost no countries that liked Wuxia. After all, they were all Westerners, and they all wore the same pants. Among the countries that hated Wuxia the most, many people who liked World War II history recommended Germany. That's right, Germany was the country that hated Wuxia the most besides the United States and Japan. Spain, which had countless fans in La Liga, was also a country that hated Wuxia the most. Next was the United Kingdom and Poland. They were all countries that were not worse than France. In the dairy area, there were mainly 4 types of dairy cows. Among them, Shanghai only recognized the Holstein, which was the Dutch dairy cow. In addition, there were 3 types of dairy cows from the United Kingdom. They were called Irish cows, graceful cows, and British cows. When these dairy cows gathered together, the air was filled with the smell of milk other than the smell of cow. The smell of milk mixed with the smell of cow dung made people feel, well, it was a little disgusting. Shanghai's cows were mostly used for meat, so he didn't need any dairy cows to produce milk. The milk produced by his cows was enough for the people in their manor, so they quickly left the area. After the dairy area, it was the beef area. At this point, Shanghai knew what it meant to be surprised by nothing. There were dozens of types of cattle here. Shanghai recognized some of them, and Shanghai didn't. Robbins Garcia introduced them one by one to Shanghai. Hayford cattle, Shorthorn cattle, Angus cattle, Charolais cattle, Limousin cattle, Piedmont cattle, Johnina cattle, Lincoln red cattle, Hornless red cattle, Gros cattle, Devon cattle, Mary Grey cattle. In addition to these ancient breeds, there were many breeds of cattle that were crossbred with another type of cattle, Zebu cattle and ordinary cattle. For example, Brahman cattle, Boraford cattle, Barogas cattle, St. Gertrudis cattle, Beef King cattle, Panamera cattle, Bifaro cattle, and so on. The so-called Zebu cattle was a type of cattle that specialized in the tropics. Zebu cattle were found in Africa, the tropics of Asia, and some places in South America. This type of cattle had a huge tumor on the back of their neck, which looked very strange. Shanghai was very interested in a type of cattle called Beef King cattle. This type of cattle was very popular here. Many people would buy this type of cattle, because this type of cattle should be considered a recently cultivated breed of cattle. It had the advantage of being able to tolerate coarse feeding, rarely getting sick, and growing fast. At present, there were many large cattle farms in Texas and Montana that specialized in supermarkets, raising this type of cattle. This type of cattle was born from birth to 15 months. Except for the 3-month calf period, this type of cattle could grow 1 ton a year. Moreover, the slaughter rate was quite high. In supermarkets, more than 50% of the commercial-grade beef was from this type of cattle. However, this type of cattle had a fatal flaw, which was that it couldn't grow good meat. Therefore, Shanghai just looked at it and gave up. In the last section, they sold varieties that could be used for both purposes. They could be eaten as beef cattle or raised as dairy cows. The main breeds were the dual-purpose short-horned cattle, Simmental cattle, Swiss brown cattle, Danish red cattle, Angler cattle, Sindhi red cattle, Sahiwa cattle, and so on. However, these had nothing to do with Shanghai, and he wasn't going to buy the dual-purpose type. He was mainly eyeing the beef cattle. There were a lot of beef cattle to choose from here. After Shanghai came here, he directly chose 20,000 Angus cattle. After booking the place, the cattle business here would naturally send the cattle to him on time. Unless they didn't want to make money. Looking at Robbins Garcia and the others, they knew that these people wouldn't dare to fool Shanghai with bad cattle. After choosing the 20,000 Angus cattle, Shanghai was ready to look at the other cattle. In fact, Shanghai was quite interested in the Siani cattle. However, as soon as Shanghai asked about this cattle, he gave up. This cattle was the largest breed of beef cattle and could grow to 1780 kilograms. But first, this cattle was a service breed. In the beginning, it was like the Belgian blue cattle. It was good looking, but it couldn't produce marbled meat. This was the most important thing, so after Jiang Hai thought about it, he gave up the other cattle. Instead, he chose a more stable one. He first bought 5,000 short-horned cattle. This kind of cattle had a creamy fat ratio of 3.9%, which was a little low, but the slaughter rate was very high, 65 to 72%, which was much higher than the average beef cattle. An adult cattle could grow to a ton. In addition to the short-horned cattle, Jiang Hai also bought some other cattle, such as Charolais cattle and Limousin cattle. He also bought 5,000 of these two types of cattle, a total of 35,000. Plus the 10,000 in the manor, he had a total of 45,000 cattle. Of course, 3,000 of these bulls would be killed this winter. There were also some calves that would grow up and then be killed. Although it was a bit cruel, this was the reality, wasn't it? You bought cattle really fast. You bought it just by looking at it? Looking at Jiang Hai quickly writing a check in front of her, Frau Walton couldn't help but ask with some doubts. After all, she was in this line of work, so she had never bought cattle, but she still understood it. According to the experts on her side, buying cattle also needed to look carefully. However, Jiang Hai was not the same as her. Jiang Hai didn't need to look particularly carefully when buying cattle. Because he was very confident in his aura and his ranch, he only looked at the sample cattle. After confirming that there were no major problems, he ordered the cattle. The inspection after the cattle was delivered to his door was naturally much stricter. At least, the cattle with defects could not pass the eyes of the cowboys, so he was quite happy to buy the cattle. Really, I thought you were going to buy cattle for a long time, so I specially asked for a week's leave. Looking at Jiang Hai buying the cattle happily, Frau Walton snorted. It's only been 2 days. I can't go back to work now, right? Besides, I haven't had enough fun yet. Looking at her, how could Jiang Hai not understand what she meant? He smiled, hugged her waist, and kissed her on the mouth. Doesn't that mean that you can accompany me when you are not at home for 5 days? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Frau Walton couldn't help but smile. This guy is really getting better at talking, but at this time, Jiang Hai and Frau Walton's phones rang almost at the same time. The two had to separate and answer the phone respectively. However, although the people who answered the phone and the people who called were different, the first sentence was the same. Du Feimin's beef cattle are ready to be sold. Chapter 809. Your Highness, the cows have been slaughtered. As Jiang Hai and the others received the news, in a magnificent villa in Dubai. A palace? A man in black asked Du Feimin, who was standing in front of him. The cows have finally been slaughtered. Du Feimin let out a long sigh. His hand, which was originally holding the wine glass, couldn't help but tremble. Then, he took a deep breath. It had to be known that he had used up all of his blood and sweat over the past year to raise these cows. This success or failure was related to his position in this country. Although it was impossible for him to become the chief, he still wanted more power. What's the situation like? Du Feimin took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down. After taking a sip of red wine, he asked the man in black in front of him. The man in black could naturally tell that, although his master was pretending to be calm, he was actually very nervous. Thus, he didn't beat around the bush and directly said, a total of 100,000 cows were slaughtered this time. All of them were selected to be relatively healthy. The average slaughter rate was 68%. The percentage of marbled beef was 100%. The average percentage of premium grade beef was 5.8%. When he heard the man in black, Du Feimin couldn't help but let out a long sigh. Then, the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up. It wasn't because he was inexperienced, but because they had actually succeeded. They had actually succeeded. Du Feimin didn't raise Angus cows. He only raised big cows, each of which weighed about a ton. Based on a ton, the average slaughter rate was 68%. That was 680 kilograms of beef. 5.8% of that was 40 kilograms of beef. Based on the price of $700 per kilogram, the premium grade beef was worth $28,000. Buying the cow cost about $2,000. Including the labor, that was only $4,000. Of course, this didn't include the cost of the fodder. Just the premium grade beef alone was enough to make 7 rounds, not to mention the other types of beef. After receiving the report from the man in black, the smile on Du Feimin's face became even brighter. Butchering rate, 68%. Special grade meat yield rate, 8%. Special grade meat yield rate, 2%. Preferred grade meat yield rate, 3%. Standard grade meat yield rate, 1%. Commercial grade meat yield rate, 9%. Usable grade meat yield rate, 13%. Minced grade meat yield rate, 8%. Canned grade meat yield rate, 2%. Injury rate, 13%. According to the current wholesale price in Europe, premium grade beef was $700 per kilogram, select grade beef was $250 per kilogram, preferred grade beef was $100 per kilogram, standard grade beef was $6 per kilogram, commercial grade beef was $3 per kilogram, and usable grade beef was $1 per kilogram. Mincing and canning didn't count for now. For this cow, the superior grade weighed 40 kilograms, the special grade weighed 76 kilograms, the preferred grade weighed 145 kilograms, the standard grade weighed 184 kilograms, the commercial grade weighed 122 kilograms, and the usable grade weighed 88 kilograms. The rest were calculated separately. Just the meat alone was $28,000 for premium grade, $19,000 for select grade, $14,500 for select grade, $1,100 for standard grade, $366 for commercial grade, and $88 for usable grade. Although it was far from Jiang Hai's beef cow, this cow was estimated to be $63,000. Looking at the report in front of him, Du Feimin smiled. He was quite happy. He was glad that he had made the choice back then. He had trusted Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai had also given him a huge sum of money. He had raised 1 million cows in total. Apart from the 200,000 cows and calves he hadn't killed, the remaining 800,000 were worth $63,000 each. That was $54 billion. Did anyone know what $54 billion felt like? Although the remaining $400 million was for Jiang Hai to buy grass, Du Feimin had earned $50 million. But he had also earned 50 billion. This was 50 billion. Most importantly, this money could be earned every year. As he thought about this, Du Feimin's heart started beating faster for no reason. His position in Dubai had always been quite awkward. After all, his father had been qualified to inherit the throne in the past, although the current royal family wasn't like it had been a long time ago. Winners were kings, losers were bandits. When a person became an emperor, the people they had to guard against the most were their own brothers. Therefore, the princes who failed to seize the throne didn't have a good ending. As long as they didn't rebel, the current tribal chiefs couldn't kill them. However, they were still far away from the most important areas. For example, his father didn't care about anything now. Du Feimin was in charge of a part of the tourism industry. However, the tourism industry in Dubai hadn't been doing well in recent years. He wasn't doing very well. There were already some people in the imperial family who were aiming for his position. Although it wasn't to the extent of being in a precarious situation, Du Feimin also knew that there were thieves who were aiming for him. This was definitely not good news. However, he was now relieved. With this project that would generate at least $50 billion a year, he would become one of the most important people in this country. Although he wouldn't immediately enter the core of the country, his position in the upper echelons would be as firm as a rock. He immediately called Jiang Hai to express his excitement. At the same time, he told Jiang Hai that he would buy all the grass in his manor in the future. However, Jiang Hai naturally wouldn't do that. Now that the profits from the grass had appeared, Jiang Hai was also considering whether to raise the price. Therefore, his words were a little vague over the phone. However, after Du Feynman heard Jiang Hai's words, he didn't care, because the profits from the beef were really too much. Therefore, he could bear to give up some more. Besides, Jiang Hai had also said that he would mainly grow emperor bamboo grass and alfalfa in the future. The price of these two kinds of grass was originally higher than that of ordinary grass, so it was understandable that Jiang Hai would sell them more expensive. Even if the price was doubled, it wouldn't be much. Now that Jiang Hai had provided a year's worth of grass for 1 million cows, the price was about $300 million. It was close to $400 million. Even if $400 million was doubled, it would only be $800 million. $800 million could generate a profit of $5 million. No matter how stupid Du Feynman was, he still understood this. After chatting with Jiang Hai for a while, the two agreed to go to Jiang Hai's manor to discuss in detail when they had time. Then, they hung up the phone. Du Feynman, who had hung up the phone, was naturally very happy. Now, he would take this report and go to the royal family to slap their faces. He would let those despicable people who coveted him know that he, Master Du Feynman, was back. On the other side, Jiang Hai was working hard at this time. Looking at the people around him who had already fallen asleep, Jiang Hai also smiled at Prawalton, who was dissatisfied with him stopping. The war continued. While Du Feynman was slapping their faces and Jiang Hai was fighting, a storm swept through the whole world's animal husbandry. As mentioned earlier, Du Feynman's subordinates had sent the samples of the grass to many research institutions around the world. Although some of the grass was recovered in the end, they were all from Europe. The Asian countries, such as Japan, Korea, Oceania's Australia, and the United States, were not recovered. Therefore, there were many people who knew that Jiang Hai had strong grass. Luke Shan, who was in the United States, had already contacted Jiang Hai before this. He had also signed a contract and obtained the first batch of grass. However, other countries and people were still observing. They also wanted to know the effect of these super grass. National institutions were far from comparable to each other. Therefore, although Du Feynman's people did not disclose this information this time, it was easy to find out that 100,000 cows were killed. However, it was still easy to find out that 100,000 cows had been killed. They didn't know the details on the report, but they could take in the masters who had killed the cows and make an estimate. Almost overnight, everyone knew that Jiang Hai's super grass was effective, and the effect was quite good. After those cows were eaten, the cows, which were originally worth only a few $1,000s, were now worth about $60,000. Even if it was not $60,000, it was still more than $50,000. How much profit was this? They did not even dare to think about it. Capitalism talked about 50%, 100%, 200%. How much was this now? A few thousand. It would be strange if they did not go crazy. Jiang Hai was practically a gold mine. Almost everyone in the world who was related to animal husbandry was trying to find Jiang Hai. All the research institutions and all the scientists in this field were trying to solve the mystery of Jiang Hai's grass. For a time, the animal husbandry industry in the whole world was shocked. Of course, there were also some countries who did not know. For example, Wuxia. In Wuxia, no research institution had received the grass from Japan. In China, Jiang Hai did not have any investment projects except for Qi Li's restaurant. Therefore, China was also confused about the shock of animal husbandry abroad and did not understand what was going on. However, no matter what happened in China, the animal husbandry industry abroad was really like a tsunami. Everyone was looking for Jiang Hai, seeking cooperation, inquiring about information, threatening him, and all kinds of other things. However, after looking for half a night, they found that they could not find Jiang Hai. Almost no one knew about Jiang Hai's phone number. Only a few people knew about it. Apart from the people in his manor, only Qi Li, Prawalton, and Du Feynman knew about it. However, it was impossible for these three people to give Jiang Hai's phone number to anyone. There was no doubt about that. Therefore, even if the outside world was about to turn upside down, Jiang Hai was still in the hotel room, with his left arm around Pra Walton and his right arm around Fail Ferio, sleeping soundly. However, Moses Adams was really miserable. As Jiang Hai's lawyer, his phone was really flooded with calls. Almost everyone who knew about his relationship with Jiang Hai called him. As a lawyer, he could not turn off his phone. How depressing. Chapter 8:10. There was a type of grass that cows could grow 100% marbled beef after eating it, and the quality was extremely high. If someone had said this 3 years ago, they would have probably been scolded to death by animal husbandry people. But now, this was a real thing, a fact. Because this grass was the grass in Jiang Hai's manor. Ever since Du Feimin's report came out, Jiang Hai's manor became popular almost overnight. Of course, this wasn't the same as being popular among the people. Jiang Hai had become popular in the eyes of some people. These people were some countries and animal husbandry people. Animal husbandry people were easy to persuade. After all, no one was unwilling to let their cattle earn more money. But after all, they were just ordinary people. They had no way to influence Jiang Hai. But countries were different. Some countries, animal husbandry was their main source of income, such as the famous Japan and Korea in Asia. Now, the whole country was thinking about how to get their hands on Jiang Hai's secret. Every time this happened, Jiang Hai would always be glad. He was glad that he came to the United States and not China. Because in the United States, as long as Jiang Haibao could protect himself, the United States government would not do anything to Jiang Hai. This secret was Jiang Hai's, so the country might research it in private, but at least they would not force Jiang Hai to hand over this technology. Jiang Hai was the one who kept this secret. The country might research it in private, but at least they would not force him to hand over this technology. It was like the Iron Man series in the American movies. Compared to other superheroes, Iron Man had replicable abilities. All his abilities were in his armor. So in the movies, the American government could only think of forcing him to hand over the armor. But although Tony Stark was not a politician and did not have much power, he had a certain amount of fame and money. So, the American government did not dare to use force. Although it was just a movie, it also reflected reality. Jiang Hai was like this now. He had a background in Wuxia, he was on good terms with Du Feimin, he was on good terms with the Walton family, he was a big taxpayer in Boston, he was the richest man in Winthrop. These halos were imposed on him, which made those monsters not dare to touch him. Especially now that the ruling party was the Democratic Party, and Massachusetts was the stronghold of the Democratic Party. Some of Jiang Hai's taxes had become political donations to these guys, so on the surface, these guys wouldn't let anything happen to Jiang Hai. Therefore, Jiang Hai only needed to be careful not to disappear unknowingly. For this reason, Jiang Hai specially invited Azalina and the others. This could be considered as his foresight. Jiang Hai didn't want to assume what would happen if he was in China. These were unrealistic, but at least it wouldn't be as easy as it was now. After all, some countries had different consciousness systems, and the results were also different. He wasn't afraid of finding trouble with Jiang Hai openly, and he didn't care about his reputation. It was also unlikely that he would find trouble with Jiang Hai privately. In the face of Jiang Hai, who was like a hedgehog, it seemed like he could only visit him alone. Therefore, before those big forces who were crazy about Jiang Hai's pasture could make a move, those small and medium forces had already heard about Jiang Hai's situation and were ready to visit Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai's home address wasn't difficult to find. Since the news came from Du Feimin, early the next morning, someone drove over to visit Jiang Hai's home. After Qi Jie received the news, she directly put up a sign that she wouldn't receive anyone. Because of this, a lot of people were given the cold shoulder. This also made a lot of people's impression of Jiang Hai become worse. But no matter how bad it became, it had nothing to do with Jiang Hai, at least he thought so. After he received the news that day, he had to admit that he was lucky. At least he wasn't at home now. What he was most annoyed about was having to entertain those guys. These guys all came with bad intentions, and Jiang Hai was very clear. Therefore, ignoring them was the best choice. After Prawalton learned about this, he told Jiang Hai that their vacation might be over, but Jiang Hai could stay in his villa for a while. It was still quite safe there. Therefore, Jiang Hai separated from Burke Dollar and Robbins Garcia the next day. He went to Prawalton's villa in Atlantic City, and the two went back to receive the cattle. For 3 days in a row, Jiang Hai's house in Winthrop was crowded with people and carriages, but Jiang Hai hid away. Countless forces came looking for Jiang Hai. Some of them wanted to buy out the secrets in Jiang Hai's hands. In their opinion, there was nothing that couldn't be bought with money. Some of them wanted to cooperate with Jiang Hai. Some of them were even more direct, they wanted to buy the manor. Naturally, there were also some who wanted to take a step back and buy grass from Jiang Hai. However, these people still didn't get anything. It was that simple. Because Jiang Hai wasn't there, they spent a lot of money to find the cowboys here. When they learned that Jiang Hai went out to play and wasn't in the manor, many people were tempted. Therefore, they began to quietly look for Jiang Hai. After they found him, it was unclear what they would do. But even if they racked their brains, they probably wouldn't think that Jiang Hai was hiding in Prawalton's villa. After Prawalton came back, she put more energy into her work, although she only rested for 3 days. But now that Jiang Hai was living in her house, she was full of motivation. After she went back, she first talked to the Walton family and told them not to be swayed, because Jiang Hai's secret couldn't be told to anyone. Secondly, they just had to make money honestly. Whether Prawalton's warning was useful or not, at least on the surface, the Walton family calmed down. Indeed, they didn't need to get involved in animal husbandry. They were in the retail business. As long as they got hold of Jiang Hai, they would get more benefits. Secondly, they didn't want to make Jiang Hai unhappy. They could also use Jiang Hai to get in touch with the people who bought his grass. After these people bought the grass, they also needed to sell the cattle. So why couldn't they sell the cattle? Zhao Hai had to admit that the Walton family's people were really smart. After they figured it out, on the 5th day, they announced that Jiang Hai was a guest of the Walton family. This meant that they were on the same starting line as Jiang Hai. This also gave up many people's thoughts. Jiang Hai wasn't an ungrateful person. Since the Walton family helped him, he wouldn't be stingy with his friendship. So he gave them Du Feimin's phone number and took the initiative to build a bridge. The beef that Du Feimin couldn't consume could be sold to the Walton family. Of course, he was mainly a middleman. The specifics of the negotiations had nothing to do with him. And the Walton family, who got benefits from Jiang Hai, naturally knew how to negotiate a business deal. He heard that this business deal was negotiated quickly, but Jiang Hai didn't know how it was negotiated. There were still a lot of people visiting Jiang Hai. Originally, he was only going to stay outside for a week. But now that he looked around, it was almost the end of September. This made him a little worried. After all, he still wanted to go back for the Mid-Autumn Festival. But as far as the current situation was concerned, as long as someone found out that he had returned to his manor, then he wouldn't be able to live a peaceful life. Just as Jiang Hai was considering whether to go back quietly and then stay in the manor until this matter gradually subsided, Valentina sent a message to Jiang Hai's Tinglong Company in Boston. What? You found that person? Hearing Valentina's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but tremble and sat up a little excitedly, but he accidentally made Colin Barlovich, who was lying in front of him and was constantly swallowing, almost fall down. Feeling her movement, Jiang Hai immediately smiled apologetically and lay down again, and she continued to move. These days, Jiang Hai slept with Prawalton at night, and during the day, the girls of Prawalton naturally wouldn't let Jiang Hai go easily. Just like now, since he got up in the morning, Jiang Hai has not been idle, but fortunately, Jiang Hai's body is really strong, otherwise, he will be exhausted in a few days. Yes, we found Bruce David. This guy is currently living in Los Angeles, but he no longer opens a bar and has become a very bad person. At the same time, we have also found the coordinates on the map you asked us to find. The location is in Redwood National Park at the junction of California and Oregon. I have sent Lei Lizzie to check it out. If there is specific news, I will inform you immediately." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Valentina also said on the other side. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai's eyes lit up. These two things can be regarded as two good news. One news is related to the badge he is concerned about, and the other news is related to a treasure. Now he can't go home anyway. Instead of this, it's better to go to California. First, he can find out the situation of the badge he wants, and second, he can see if the gold mine is real. As for returning the gold mine to the Toga tribe, he has not considered it. Those gold mines were discovered by him, so they are his, but this still needs to be studied carefully. If a gold mine is really found, how to bring it back, what name to use, and how to get in. These things are very troublesome, but fortunately, Jiang Hai and the others are not ordinary people. If there is any news, let me know immediately. While thinking about it, Jiang Hai hung up the phone and then couldn't help but take a deep breath. Feeling Jiang Hai's action, Colin Pavlovich in front of him couldn't help but raise his head. "Did my teeth scratch you?" Looking at Jiang Hai, she asked with some worry. Looking at this golden cat, Jiang Hai smiled, touched her hair, and threw her directly on the bed. Chapter 8:11. Hiss. In the middle of the night, Jiang Hai was awakened by the urge to pee. He opened his sleepy eyes. Jiang Hai looked at the big bed and the lovely people lying on it. He couldn't help but rub his head, and then quietly came to the ground. After going to the bathroom to relieve his needs, he walked out of the room in a bathrobe. This was already the 10th day that Jiang Hai had stayed at Pra Walton's place. Since the day when Du Feimin's cows were slaughtered, he hadn't had a moment of peace. There was no way for him to return to the manor, so he decided to hide here for a while. However, based on the current situation, hiding here was actually not a very good choice. Why? Because it was tiring. In the past, some people asked why the country abolished polygamy like in the ancient times. Some people said that it was because the ratio of men to women was normal now, unlike the Cold Weapon era where there were frequent wars and there were more men and women. Some people also said that it was because the social status of women had increased, and women could hold up half the sky. But in fact, in Jiang Hai's view, monogamy might also be a measure to protect men. That kind of thing, not only men had needs, but also women had needs. Between men and women, there was basically only an exhausted cow, but no land that was plowed and spoiled. In the beginning, Jiang Hai still enjoyed living here for 10 days. These girls were quite open, and Pra Walton was also quite indulgent of Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai could play however he wanted. Even if he was watching Japanese romantic action idol dramas, there was no problem for him to follow the routine in those dramas. As long as Jiang Hai wanted, he could do whatever he wanted. It could be said that she was very indulgent of Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai himself was also a dragon, so in the beginning, except for sleeping and eating time, Jiang Hai was always in a state of war. But after 3 days, Jiang Hai was a little floating. After a week, Jiang Hai was a little weak. For example, today was the 10th day he came here. He only came 3 times during the day, and came again at night with Pra Walton. But even so, he felt that his feet were a little floating, as if he couldn't exert any strength. Sigh, it's me. If it were an ordinary person, he might have been hospitalized long ago. Rubbing his hair, Jiang Hai went downstairs to get a bottle of beer, and sat by the window under the moon. He wanted to be quiet. From here, it could be seen that these girls and the girls in his manor treated him differently in this matter. There were more women in his manor, but they actually still cared about Jiang Hai very much, so they only arranged for 4 people to take turns every day. If it were an ordinary person, it might have been over long ago, but with Jiang Hai's physical fitness, it was also good. Moreover, it was not that he didn't have time to rest. Every month, he could always rest for about 10 days. But it was different here. Although these girls also valued Jiang Hai, they only valued Jiang Hai's ability. After all, they relied on Pra Walton to live. They loved Pra Walton, not him. They didn't need Jiang Hai's money. Their relationship with Jiang Hai was more like mutual needs. that was all. So they thought more about themselves and wanted to make themselves comfortable. As for Jiang Hai, let's talk about it later. This was also the reason why Jiang Hai felt a little homesick after staying here for a few days. Although he played more freely here, this was not his home after all. His home was in Winthrop. Looking at the moon in the sky, as the time gradually approached, Jiang Hai also thought about the Mid-Autumn Festival with his family. Should I just give up and go back? Thinking of this, Jiang Hai couldn't help but rub his head. That was why people were afraid of being famous, and pigs were afraid of being fat. Especially for people like Jiang Hai, he really didn't care whether he was famous or not. He didn't know when this storm would blow over, and he didn't feel comfortable staying outside. Can't sleep? I thought you must have gone to bed very early these days because you were so tired. Just as Jiang Hai was thinking about it, a voice suddenly sounded in Jiang Hai's ear. Hearing this voice, Jiang Hai looked back and found that it was none other than one of Pra Walton's little girlfriends, Cheryl Lee, the Korean girl. The moonlight sprinkled on her body, perfectly presenting her body in front of Jiang Hai. Maybe it was because of Pra Walton's order, or their previous habits. If Jiang Hai's place was only a little cool, then this place was completely cold. Because in this villa, these women didn't wear anything. His upper body, lower body, and even shoes were not worn. He was naked from head to toe, with nothing on him. The moonlight shone on her skin. It was just her real skin that attracted Jiang Hai's gaze. Although he had seen this many times, to be honest, every time he saw it, he felt that it wasn't enough. He had to admit that these girls were impeccable, whether it was in terms of appearance or figure. Not to mention Cheryl Lee, the other girls had the thick pores and freckles that were unique to Europeans, as well as the smell that came from eating beef and mutton all year round. However, these girls did not have any of these. They were all very tall and had very thin pores. They were almost the same as Asian women. However, they still had the three-dimensional 5 views of Europeans. Their figures were very slender and full. They weren't as thin as some girls. They were thin where they should be thin, and fat where they should be fat. They usually had nothing to do. The only thing they had to do was to maintain their figures with the help of professionals. Therefore, they were the most delicate existences. As for the problem of body odor, when your staple food was more than $200 per kilogram of beef, you would also find that the problem of body odor when eating beef didn't apply to your body. When she saw Jiang Hai looking over, she couldn't help but smile. Then, she took the initiative to sit opposite Jiang Hai. She took the beer from Jiang Hai's hand and took a sip. Then, she stuffed the beer back into Jiang Hai's hand. Ugh, this beer is really bitter. I'm not used to drinking it without lemon. Cheryl Lee curled her lips and said to Jiang Hai. A large part of domestic beer was blended. There were very few brews. For the sake of taste, the alcohol content of these beers wasn't particularly high. Beer had 2 degrees. One was the degree of malt, and the other was the degree of alcohol. Usually, when others drank, they mainly drank malt, which was about 10 degrees. In addition, there was also the degree of alcohol. This was actually the most important factor. This affected the taste. The degree of alcohol in the brewed beer was high. With a high degree of alcohol, after drinking it, it would feel very bitter. But if it was iced and drunk with lemon juice, it would feel sweet. If someone didn't believe it, they could buy some Corona and drink it with lemon. Then, they would feel it. However, Jiang Hai was used to drinking here, so it felt good even without lemon. You are still more used to drinking soju. I saw on TV that people in South Korea drink like this. Listening to Cheryl Lee's words, Jiang Hai smiled. It seemed that when he watched those Korean dramas, the people in them all drank like this. Yeah, do you like to drink it too? Hearing Jiang Hai mention soju, Cheryl Lee couldn't help but ask happily. Me? I don't like it. Looking at her excited appearance, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile and say. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cheryl Lee couldn't help but kick Jiang Hai. This guy really likes to sing a different tune. Being kicked by her, Jiang Hai didn't care. Instead, he smiled and continued to drink. What he said was the truth. He really didn't like South Korea's stuff. South Korea's soju was actually similar to green wine. They were both brewed with rice. The degree of alcohol wasn't high, around 18 to 22 degrees. But because there were no spices, the taste was, hee. According to the words of the Northeasterners, drinking soju was very noisy. It wasn't strong, and the stimulation was very small. It was as strong as beer, but it wasn't that strong. Instead, it had an indescribable fragrance. So basically, when Wuxia people drank soju, if they liked it for the first time, then they liked it. If they didn't like it, then they wouldn't drink it in the future. Jiang Hai belonged to the kind of people who didn't like it. However, Jiang Hai still liked a lot of Korean food. For example, he liked to eat cold noodles. This was Korean food. He liked to eat cakes, barbecue, and especially barbecue sauce. Without barbecue sauce, barbecue was incomplete, but he really didn't like soju. Seeing that Jiang Hai didn't say anything, Cheryl Lee hesitated. Have you been busy recently? Looking at Jiang Hai, Cheryl Lee asked him. When she asked, she didn't dare to look at Jiang Hai. It could be seen that she was somewhat guilty and hesitant at this time. Don't you know whether I'm busy or not? You stay by my side all day long. Although I'm not busy now, I shouldn't be able to leave here. What's the matter? Looking at her hesitant appearance, Jiang Hai froze for a moment. Then, he thought of something in his mind, but on the surface, he still sat there calmly. He wanted to hear whether Cheryl Lee was looking for him for that matter. There's someone who wants to see you. I don't know if it's convenient for you. Clenching her teeth, Cheryl Lee spoke. She was just a messenger. If she wasn't there, that person would still be able to find Jiang Hai. It's just that it wouldn't be that convenient. Someone from Korea? Hearing her words, Jiang Hai looked at her and asked with a smile. She also nodded heavily. It seems that I'm right. Touching his chin, Jiang Hai narrowed his eyes and said. Chapter 8:12. Pra Walton's identity was not a secret in the world. Pra Walton was one of the princesses of the Walmart family. Although her family background was not very good, she had become the focus of attention from all sides ever since she showed her strength. Naturally, the background of the girls around her was also investigated thoroughly. No matter which country it was, they were very happy to arrange their people around her. Cheryl Lee and the others were such people. They were not arranged by the country after they had been trained. After the country knew about their existence, they were roped in again. Of course, they were not spies. To be exact, they were just some mouthpieces. Pra Walton and the Walmart Group also needed some mouthpieces like this. They needed to pass on some information that they needed to let these countries know. They could also let these countries report back to them. But these women would be like this for the rest of their lives. It was impossible for them to be given any power or the like. This was also why Pra Walton had 5 women around her, but only Isabel Lauren was in charge of some things. The others were only in charge of making beautiful flowers. They did not care about anything else. The reason why Isabel Lauren was in charge was because she was an orphan. The power of Jiang Hai's forage this time could be said to have caused a shock in the global animal husbandry industry. Everyone was looking at Jiang Hai. Everyone hoped to get a piece of the cake. They all saw Jiang Hai's performance. It was definitely impossible to do it openly. Needless to say, the halos on Jiang Hai's body didn't need to be said, and it was also impossible to do it secretly. Jiang Hai's influence in the local area was deeper than they thought. Since it was impossible to do it openly or secretly, it was better to do it privately. Just like Du Feynman, this was also very good. Of course, if they came to buy forage, some countries would not be interested in Jiang Hai's forage at all. After all, how big was Jiang Hai's manor? How much forage could he collect? Barbara Martina from Argentina and Fail Ferrio from Australia were also in Pra Walton. These two had not been in contact with Jiang Hai alone recently. This meant that there was no one behind them. These people did not care about Jiang Hai's forage. What they wanted was technology. Since the technology could not be obtained, the forage was useless. If they wanted it, they would not distribute it evenly. Instead, it was Cheryl Lee who found Jiang Hai and expressed that South Korea wanted to buy forage from Jiang Hai. Hearing Cheryl Lee's words, Jiang Hai smiled. He did not care about this. If it was to buy forage, then he would sell it. The newly developed grass market was for the purpose of selling grass, but if it was for other purposes, I will discuss it with Pra tomorrow and tell you. Hearing Cheryl Lee's words, Jiang Hai also smiled and said. Hearing that Jiang Hai wanted to discuss it, Cheryl Lee did not care. After finishing her business, she turned around and went back to sleep. Looking at her graceful figure, although Jiang Hai was a little angry in his heart, his body was weak. In the end, he gave up with a wry smile. After drinking, he returned to his room and fell asleep with Cheryl Lee in his arms. After getting up early the next morning, Jiang Hai stopped Pra Walton, who was going to work, and explained to her that Cheryl Lee looked for him last night. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Pra Walton also told Jiang Hai that he could contact this South Korea. Jiang Hai must sell his forage, but he could not only sell it to Du Feimin and Luke Shan. It was also a good choice to increase the number of people who wanted to buy forage. However, Jiang Hai had to pay attention to some things. The business world was like a battlefield. The effect between countries was originally unequal. These guys were ungrateful. If Jiang Hai wanted to come into contact with them, then it would be better for him to make some preparations. After hearing Pra Walton's words, Jiang Hai thought for a moment and then called Chi Li and Moses Adams. The three of them discussed it on the phone. They felt that Jiang Hai should be able to study it and solve some of the people who wanted to buy it. At least nominally, they had to solve the problem of the people who wanted to buy it. This way, Jiang Hai could save a lot of effort. So he thought for a moment and thought that he could refer to those who were selling things. He could gather those who wanted to buy his forage and then directly distribute the shares to them. That would be enough. And the most important thing was that these people gathered together, it was easier for him to raise the price. At the same time, he could also save himself a lot of trouble. To be honest, Jiang Hai was very disgusted with those politicians and professional businessmen. Chatting with them was simply a matter of life and death. Although Jiang Hai was very smart, he didn't like to use his brain. So he hated talking nonsense with those people. It was best to solve these guys at once. This way, Jiang Hai could save himself a lot of trouble. Since the decision was made, Jiang Hai also talked to Pra Walton. Pra Walton also felt that although this couldn't maximize the benefits, Jiang Hai would undoubtedly save a lot of trouble. And it was quite good to do so. After she agreed, Jiang Hai called Moses Adams. He would leave this matter to him. As for the time, he set it to be the day before the Mid-Autumn Festival. This way, after he was done, he could go back to the manor to spend the mid-autumn. Jiang Hai was the kind of person who would do what he thought. He called Moses Adams. Moses Adams was also very interested in this opportunity to make friends with the major forces. Then he booked the top floor of the Boston Harbor Hotel, including a banquet hall. Jiang Hai spent more than $3 million just to book these things. But Jiang Hai didn't care, because this time, the wealth he would create would be more than $3 million. This time, he was going to make 300 million? No, 3 billion. 1,000th of the cost, for Jiang Hai, was actually nothing. After making the decision and confirming the hotel, Moses Adams made a phone call. The first person he called was Du Feimin. When Du Feimin learned that Jiang Hai was forced to directly distribute the pasture, he hated his guards and the islanders even more. If it weren't for these guys, Jiang Hai's pasture would be his alone. By then, with Jiang Hai's expansion of the pasture, let alone $50 billion, he would be able to make $100 billion. And you should know that the Dubai Emirate wasn't very big. In 2012, the national GDP of Dubai was $86.7 billion, but this year, he alone made $50 billion. GDP meant gross national product. He alone increased Dubai's economy by 30%. If it weren't for those damn guards and the islanders, they could have increased even more. In Dubai, these people were the gods. There was no need to talk about whether they paid taxes or not. Apart from buying pasture and paying the workers, the rest of the money was earned by them. But now, these things were far away from him. But he knew that this matter couldn't be blamed on Jiang Hai. It was his own problem, so he could only swallow his anger. But he was still the first to agree to Jiang Hai's invitation. Then, Moses Adams called Luke Shawn. After a long chat, Luke Shawn agreed. He knew that now was not the time to make a private deal. It was inevitable that he would come to Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai also informed Cheryl Lee and asked her to ask for South Korea's opinion. The person in charge of South Korea wanted to talk to Jiang Hai alone at first, but after knowing that Jiang Hai intended to put things on the table, they didn't say much. It was because they weren't very good at the moment. They were determined to get Jiang Hai's pasture. In addition, there were many people who received the invitation, but some of them were prepared to come. Some of them originally had impure intentions, but after learning that Jiang Hai didn't intend to tell others his secret and was only preparing to sell grass, they gave up. For example, some people from the United States, Australia, and Europe. But according to Moses Adams statistics, when Jiang Hai decided to open this branch, there were still about a dozen people who decided to come and see what the situation was. Of course, the dozen mentioned here didn't include small manor owners, farm owners, and so on. These people basically represented a region, a country, or a force. For example, Du Feynman, Luke Shawn, and South Korea. On the United States side, there were 6 people who came to participate, but only 3 of them were well known. They were Luke Shawn, who represented Texas, Archie Alderson Emerson, who represented California, and John Malone, the largest landowner in the United States, who owned 2 million acres of land. Of course, the old man himself didn't come. It was his son who came, and he only represented Montana. Even so, the power contained within this person was not something those individual investors could compare to. On Moses Adams' list, these 3 people were considered first-class clients. Du Feynman and the government of South Korea were also classified as first-class clients, but they were not first-class clients because they represented the same country. To be honest, after making money at Jiang Hai's level, one would realize that the people who represented a country were actually the poorest. This was because although a country earned a lot, it also spent a lot, especially in the developed countries. South Korea wasn't very developed. Don't forget, South Korea's main GDP came from the Samsung Group. But do you think Samsung would pay taxes to the authorities? Don't be ridiculous, so among these people, South Korea should be the most embarrassed. Chapter 8:13. Since it had been decided, Jiang Hai and the others had to start making arrangements. Walton and Moses Adams were familiar with this. After making a call and setting a time, all they had to do was wait for that day. The night before, Jiang Hai left Walton's house in Atlantic City and stayed in the presidential suite of this hotel. Galina and Ailsara were responsible for protecting Jiang Hai. At the very least, they were in contact with Jiang Hai's body. Of course, for Jiang Hai and the others, this was not a big deal. They were already used to it. After a night's stay, the next day was the day of the conference, and the bigwigs came to the hotel one after another. The first to come was naturally Du Feynman. After Moses Adams received him, he naturally had some time alone with Jiang Hai. Although he was a little annoyed that the matter had been leaked from him, with the $50 billion he had earned, it was enough for him to establish a foothold in the royal family. It was enough for him to gain a foothold in the royal family. A few days ago, he took those reports to the palace. It was almost a slap in the face to let those who refused to accept him know why the flowers were red. Now that he saw Jiang Hai again, he naturally felt a little guilty, a little helpless, and a little worried. He really wanted to monopolize all of Jiang Hai's pasture, but he knew it was impossible, so the 2 of them left after exchanging a few pleasantries. Then, Luke Shan came in person with his son. After expressing his intentions to Jiang Hai, he went to rest. Then, one by one, people arrived. They either represented individuals or forces. Moses Adams was quite excited. At the very least, he did not have many opportunities to show his face in front of these top figures. Soon, it was 3:00 in the afternoon. Jiang Hai went to the reception room first. After he arrived, the 17 people who represented individuals or forces also arrived. Jiang Hai looked at them and felt that there was a clear division between them. At this time, the 17 forces in front of him were clearly divided into 3 groups. The first group represented individuals, such as Luke Shan and the son of John Malone, an American real estate tycoon. They sat alone on the left. Those sitting in the middle were people who represented forces, such as people from Montana and New Mexico. Luke Shan from Texas came, but no one else came. In addition, there were some foreign ranchers. For example, people from Australia and Argentina. Although these 2 countries did not take Jiang Hai seriously, the ranchers in their countries took Jiang Hai very seriously. In addition to these people, the last group represented their countries. In fact, there were only 2 groups of people. One was Du Feynman, and the other was the people from South Korea. Jiang Hai deliberately looked at the person from South Korea and found that he was really arrogant. He raised his neck arrogantly, as if he disdained Jiang Hai and the others. Seeing this, Jiang Hai could not help but laugh. What a sad nation. South Korea, whether in terms of historical status or military status, was actually a very awkward country. As for the existence of South Korea, I think most of the Chinese know about it. Their existence is similar to that of Japan. It was a product of the division of power between the United States and Wuxia after World War II. The result of its existence was a war. In that war, it was naturally said that the country had won, but in fact, it was hard to say who won and who lost. After all, North Korea was not unified, and South Korea did not take over the North. Maintaining the current situation was acceptable for both the Wuxia and the United States. However, the people from South Korea were very interesting. This country was different from Japan. Japan had indeed shone in the economic aspect. In the 1980s, it was the world of the Japanese. Even the United States had to temporarily avoid them. However, later on, the United States cheated Japan, causing Japan's economy to regress by 20 years. Even so, before the rise of the Wuxia, Japan was the world's second-largest economy. As the saying goes, a starving camel is still bigger than a horse. In terms of economic development, Japan was indeed very powerful. It was only a small place, but it had the ability to stir up the world's economy. Japan also had a lot of consortiums, and many of them were internationally famous. On the other hand, although South Korea was also known as a developed country, South Korea only had the Samsung-Lee family. All of the consortiums had ties with the Samsung-Lee family. With just the Samsung-Lee family alone, it was still far from enough for them to establish themselves in the big world. They did not have too many high-end industries to send to the world. It was an awkward situation. If a country wanted to develop, it must at least be able to sell things. Other countries wanted to buy things. For example, China was still a developing country. Most of the things they sold were raw materials, such as rare earths. This was also criticized by others. But at least, these were things that could be sold. People wanted to buy them. What did South Korea have? Cars? Mobile phones? That's all there is to it. In the world, cars were divided into 3 gears. The first gear was for European and American cars, the second gear was for Japanese cars, and the third gear was for Korean cars. This could be seen from the fact that Korea's cars didn't sell well in other countries except Asia. As for the famous mobile phones and computers in China, they were also completely defeated by brands like Apple. It could be said that they were a little embarrassed. As for South Korea, in order to develop their country, they specially created an idle economy. They used their Korean dramas and girl groups to increase their international popularity and let people come over to travel and sell their expenses. They used these people as spokespersons to sell their own country's products. Anyone who was sensible knew that this was the end of the world. For example, the place where they exported most of their culture, Wuxia mainland. As long as Wuxia was banned, the economy here would collapse. It was that simple. These people were naturally unconvinced. They mocked and provoked Wuxia every day. As for their American adoptive father, they had been showing off. They did not allow the troops to be stationed there, banned beef, etc., and went on demonstrations on the streets. The Americans listened to them and withdrew their troops. As a result, North Korea started to make a statement. Once they made a statement, they were like frightened children. They went everywhere to seek help. They even went to Soviet Russia. He had to admit that this country was quite pitiful. The people of this country were also quite interesting. They were arrogant and did not have the attitude of North Korea that was unafraid of death. According to the language of the Northeast, these people really deserved a beating. This time, they came to look for Jianghai to buy grass. Their main purpose is their country's Han cattle. Because of its geographical location, it is only a small place. The agricultural development is also not ideal. Initially, they wanted to learn from Japan and go for the high-end route. They had been promoting their country's Han cattle. But to be honest, Han cattle are not ranked in the world. They are not even as delicious as Angus cattle. This was also an unchanging fact. When Angus beef from the United States entered the Korean market, many people in Korea shouted that they did not want American beef to enter the market. Even if American beef tasted better than their own Korean beef, was 4 times cheaper, and could not be bought with fake products, they still did not want American beef to enter the market. However, the American beef still entered the market, but the authorities of South Korea had always been determined to promote their own country's beef. After learning that Jianghai had that kind of magical pasture, they cultivated their own country's Korean cattle. Then, they can announce to the world that this is their country's beef. Although it is shameless, Jianghai does not mind. Because all he cared about was money, that's all. They were willing to go to the front to take the bullet. Jianghai was very happy. After everyone sat down, Moses Adams gave each person a piece of information. This information was about the nutritional content of the grass, as well as the yield of the grass. Of course, the information mentioned above was 2 years later. Jianghai currently owned a total of 24,500 acres of pastoral area. With the cultivation of emperor bamboo grass, 1 acre of it could reach a yield of 30 tons. However, Jianghai was not prepared to take care of it, but with the transformation of spiritual energy, 1 acre of it could reach a yield of 25 tons. 1 mu is equal to 6 mu. This means that Jianghai can produce 3675000 tons of imperial bamboo grass and alfalfa in 1 year. Because Jianghai's grass is rich in nutrition, each cow only needs to eat about 10% of its body weight every day. As for the other grass, it needs to eat at least 14%. According to the calculation of 1 ton per cow, it needs to eat about 10 kilograms of grass per day. Excluding the fattening period, it is 3,650 kilograms per year, 365 tons. In other words, Jianghai's grass can supply the grass consumed by 1 million cows. Among them, Jianghai keeps 300,000 tons of grass because he is also raising cows. Of course, his cows and goats had to be eaten until they were full. The remaining 3 million tons of fodder was the amount that was allocated this time. To be honest, 3 million tons of fodder could be digested by any one of them. 900,000 cows was quite a spectacular sight for ordinary people. It was an astronomical figure, but for these people, it was not much different. In the past, Luke Shawn and Du Feynman used these grasses as nourishment. They mixed it with other grass and fed it to the cows in the manner. But they all know that if they only feed the cows with this grass, although it may not reach the level of Jianghai's cows, which could be sold for $160,000, it would at least be a lot better than now. Now, a cow was sold for $60,000. When the time comes, it may be sold for $80,000, or even $100,000. Just thinking about it made them a little excited. Chapter 8:14. Everyone present knew that Jiang Hai's grass had such an effect. Everyone wanted to take the grass for themselves. However, they knew that this was unlikely, and they had no way to find Jiang Hai's grass anywhere else. In a sense, Jiang Hai's grass was like a scorpion's poop. It was unique. Therefore, when they saw Jiang Hai's stack of information, they were a little envious. However, they also knew that it was impossible to defeat so many opponents and take these herbs for their own use. I'm not a businessman, and I don't like to bargain or play with traps. Now, we're dividing the 3 million tons of pasture that can be produced in the year after next. I can guarantee that the effect of the pasture won't be worse than the current pasture. As for how to divide the 3 million tons, it depends on your sincerity. After seeing that everyone in front of him had finished reading the information, Jiang Hai also said straightforwardly. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, one of them couldn't sit still. If you say that these grasses have such an effect, do they really have such an effect? Seeing is believing, and hearing is false. Aren't you a little too anxious to sell the grass that's going to grow in 2 years? The man looked at Jiang Hai, put down the information in his hand, and said very plainly. After hearing his words, many people around him nodded. These people also had the same idea. While Jiang Hai listened to Moses Adams's words, he did not know who this person was. After learning the man's identity, Jiang Hai nodded. He was Paul Casby, an Australian livestock tycoon. He had about 700,000 acres of land under his control, raised about 1.2 million cows, and had more than 30 million sheep. Although cows were important to Australians, the economic value of sheep was actually higher. The whole of Australia was desertified, although they put the name of a disaster on the rabbits. But actually, the development of animal husbandry was also greatly related. The food that a cow ate was more than what 10 sheep ate. Therefore, there were indeed more sheep in Australia than cows. However, the sheep they raised were not for drinking milk and eating mutton. They mainly ate beef and raised sheep for the purpose of shaving their wool. Australia's wool was quite famous around the world. Hello, Mr. Casby. I'm here to answer your questions. Believe me if you want. If you don't, you can leave. Although this man had some status, it didn't mean that Jiang Hai would spoil him. Jiang Hai gently tapped the table with his fingernail as he said to the man in a flat tone. You. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the man's face suddenly turned red. What did Jiang Hai mean? Was the shop bullying its customers? Indeed, Jiang Hai was bullying his customers. The grass was his. If these people wanted to buy it, they could buy it. If they didn't want to buy it, they could leave because he didn't have to worry about selling it. It was such a simple problem. Over there, whether it was Du Feynman or Luke Shawn, they could all buy the grass. The reason why Jiang Hai held this meeting was to avoid some trouble in the future. After he sold the grass, if someone came to him again, he could directly say that the grass was sold out. He didn't know the secret, so he wouldn't tell them. This way, he could save a lot of trouble. It was precisely because of this that Jiang Hai met them here. Humph. Hearing Jiang Hai's tough words, Paul Casby looked at the people around him. He had to admit that these businessmen were really shameless. As long as there was money to be made, they didn't care about these things. The people who were still talking to him now looked elsewhere or started to study the information. This made Paul Casby feel a little embarrassed. But even so, he didn't leave. Instead, he waved his hand and sat down. What a joke. If he left this room, wouldn't it mean that this grass really had nothing to do with him anymore? He wasn't that stupid. He didn't care if Jiang Hai had a bad temper. The most important thing was to earn his own money. Now, I'll explain the price of this grass. My original manor can produce special grass. It's not the kind of grass that grows emperor bamboo grass or alfalfa. I sold it to some of my friends here for $150 per ton, but that was before I determined the exact energy of this grass. Now that I've upgraded the energy and variety of the grass, I've increased the price. The price is $600 per ton, Jiang Hai said slowly when he saw that everyone in front of him had quieted down. But as soon as he finished speaking, everyone couldn't help but gasp. F***CK, $600 per ton? Did they hear it right? One must know that the current price of emperor bamboo grass is basically maintained at $30 per ton, which is about 200 renminbi, and Jiang Hai directly increased it by 20 times. 20 times, was this a joke? After this price appeared, many people began to whisper to each other. Jiang Hai's hearing was naturally very sharp. He could hear what they were saying. They were just saying that he was crazy about money. At this price, 330 tons of grass could be sold for nearly $2 billion. $98 billion, plus some small changes, $2 billion was a lot. Even after paying taxes, Jiang Hai could still earn $1 billion. $1 billion, and this was just the money from selling grass. And most importantly, this was money that belonged to him and could be earned every year. It was impossible for these people not to be jealous. With this price, the number of people who could accept it instantly decreased by half. We can't accept the price of $600 per ton, we. Just then, Paul Casby opened his mouth again. He was here to buy grass, not give away money. This price was too exaggerated. However, before he could finish speaking, Du Feimin had already raised his hand. Jiang, my friend, it seems that they can't accept your price. $600, I'll take it all. Looking at Jiang Hai, Du Feimin smiled, his eyes shining. At the same time, he despised these people in his heart. They were really short-sighted. 330 tons of grass could provide food for 1 million cows for a year. Even if these cows were sold for only $60,000 each, it would be 60 billion in total. Don't forget that the cows he raised were also raised with a mix of grass and ordinary fodder. In other words, these 330 tons could feed 2 million cows, which was 120 billion. Even if an ordinary country had to pay taxes, after paying half, there would still be 60 billion left. $2 billion for grass, it was nothing. For Du Feimin, he would take as much grass as Jiang Hai had. This was inevitable. No, I wrote in the agreement that each person can only buy 30% at most. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai spoke very calmly. He couldn't tie his economic lifeline to someone else. Look, no one wants it. You have nothing to do with the rest anyway, so sell it to me. If not, I'll raise the price to $700 per ton. How about that? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin also spoke with a smile, his eyes shining. Who said no one wants it? We want it too. But before Du Feimin could say more to persuade Jiang Hai, Luke Shan spoke directly. As he spoke, he nodded at Jiang Hai. Then let's split it equally. Du Feimin knew that Luke Shan had been in contact with Jiang Hai before this. So when Luke Shan also said he wanted it, he couldn't help but twitch his mouth. In fact, in his opinion, the grass should all be his. If it weren't for the people who leaked the information, he would have killed them long ago. Now, he wanted to catch them and kill them again. This was all money. Your Highness Du Feimin Vihar Muhammad bin Rashid Al Maktoum, you don't think that we're sitting here just for fun, do you? We're definitely going to take this grass. At this moment, John Malone spoke with a smile. As soon as he spoke, everyone present looked at each other. They could faintly see a trace of anxiety in their eyes. Jiang Hai said that each person could buy up to 30% of the grass. Now, there were already 3 people who wanted to buy it, which meant that only 10% of the grass was left. Although these people felt that the grass was expensive, they couldn't accept it if they weren't allowed to buy it. On behalf of South Korea and the Republic of China, I would also like to discuss the issue of the grass with Mr. Jiang. At this time, the arrogant representative of South Korea, who had been sitting at the side, couldn't help but speak seriously. As soon as he spoke, the other people's expressions became a little ugly. This was exactly what Jiang Hai needed. How about this? There are only 3 million tons of grass in total. If anyone wants to buy it, write a note to me, and then I'll distribute it. Of course, you can also think that I'm not distributing it evenly, then please leave. Looking at the somewhat tense atmosphere in front of him, Jiang Hai smiled, then looked at the people in front of him and spoke seriously. After hearing what Jiang Hai said, although these people were angry, none of them dared to express it. Instead, some people who had a tacit understanding with Jiang Hai, and some people who knew how to be flexible, had already begun to write. Not long after, 17 notes were collected by Moses Adams. Jiang Hai also took a look at what was written on these notes, and he couldn't help but smile. The reason these people came here was actually more of a test and an attempt. However, none of them lacked the tens of millions or hundreds of millions to buy the grass. Therefore, the amount they gave was very large, but Jiang Hai could control the amount they bought. This was called a rare commodity worth hoarding. Chapter 8:15. Jiang Hai sat in his seat and glanced at the notes in front of him. There were a few numbers that Jiang Hai was more concerned about. Among them, John Malone wanted to buy the limited amount, which was 30%. Du Feynman and Luke Shawn wrote that they wanted as much as they could. As for the people from South Korea, they also wrote 30%. The others, like Paul Casby and the others, wrote 20%, 10%, and so on, but none of them wrote less than 10%. With all these things added together, even if Du Feynman and Luke Shawn were not included, it would still reach 300%. Of course, this was impossible. Jiang Hai also needed to maintain the interests of his friends. Therefore, after looking at it, Jiang Hai announced that the meeting was over. After everyone returned to their rooms, he would naturally visit them one by one. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, although these people were a little nervous, they would not refute what Jiang Hai said. They all returned to their rooms, looking back repeatedly. Jiang Hai looked at the notes and was amused. In fact, he had a backup plan. The 25 tons per mu he said was a total of 3 million tons. This was based on the normal grassland. These people naturally did not expect that Jiang Hai's grassland could continue to grow as long as it did not snow and the grass was covered. In fact, even if the grass was covered by snow, Jiang Hai's grass could still be cut. However, he did not want to do so. Just in one spring and one summer, the amount of grass would be 25 tons. What if it was in one autumn? Jiang Hai did not cut grass in winter, but he definitely had to cut grass in autumn. With one more season, it would be an additional 50%. Moreover, if Jiang Hai said it was 25 tons, would it be 25 tons? Was his spirit energy so worthless? According to Jiang Hai's estimation, he could sell at least 7 million tons. The remaining half was his backup plan. After returning to his room, he first met John Malone and South Korea's request of 30%. After all, there were two parties. One was the largest landlord in the United States. Jiang Hai couldn't afford to offend them. Also, it would be beneficial for him to build a good relationship with them. The other party was a developed country. Jiang Hai didn't need to be angry with them. Of course, if they weren't so shameless, Jiang Hai might have tricked them less. On John Malone's side, Jiang Hai had signed a contract for 1 million tons of grass at a price of $600 per ton. On South Korea's side, there was a total of 900,000 tons of grass at a price of $600 per ton. This amount of grass was enough to feed 600,000 cows to the level of Du Feynman. If each of the 600,000 cows was sold for $60,000, that would be $36 billion. It was quite valuable. His earliest friend, Du Feynman, naturally wouldn't mistreat him. It was $600 per ton for 2 million tons of fodder. This amount was enough to feed his $1 million cattle farm for a year. Of course, it was still far from reaching the level of Jiang Hai's cows. Luke Shan wanted 1 million tons of fodder. Jiang Hai believed that he would be more than happy to beat John Malone. Just the 4 parties had taken 2 million tons of fodder, but there were still about 500,000 tons left. This would be distributed to the others. The smaller ones would be 30 to 40,000 tons, while the larger ones would be about 100,000 tons. All 17 parties would get a share. Soon, Jiang Hai had drafted 17 contracts. Next, it was time to visit them. He went to see Du Feimin and Luke Shan first. Originally, the 2 of them were still a little nervous. After all, there were too many people to feed this time. But when they saw the numbers on the contract, they all smiled. Although before they went, Jiang Hai had hinted that they could rest assured, now that they saw the words on the contract, they were really relieved. After signing the contract, Jiang Hai naturally asked them to keep it a secret. This time, both Luke Shan and Du Feimin were very clear about it. When it came to money, it was naturally better to keep it a secret. If it was too big, it wouldn't be good news. Then, Jiang Hai went to John Malone's son's room. Here, they had a preliminary contact. John Malone's main business was in the television industry, but he knew very well that real estate was his foundation. His son, who was in charge of managing this place, was very interested in Jiang Hai's fodder. After exchanging phone numbers, the 2 of them chatted for a while before leaving. After leaving John Malone's room, Jiang Hai didn't hurry to go to the South Korean representative's room. Instead, he went to the other rooms first. After seeing the contracts that Jiang Hai handed to them, to be honest, these people felt that there were too few of them. However, it was better than nothing. Moreover, they had only heard about it. They hadn't tried using Jiang Hai's fodder in their own manner. Jiang Hai gave them a chance to try, and they were very happy. Moreover, Jiang Hai's contract was signed every 5 years. If it was really effective, they could sign it again in the next 5 years. After everyone had signed the contract, Jiang Hai and Moses Adams knocked on the door of the South Korean representative's room. "Oh, you're here. Please come in." The person who opened the door was the deputy of the representative. As soon as he saw Jiang Hai and Moses Adams, he immediately bowed. Although they were of different nationalities, for the people of South Korea, the rich are also the boss. In particular, he had also participated in the meeting just now. He knew that Jiang Hai had sold fodder for $2 billion. One must know that $1 is equivalent to 1,200 Korean coins. In other words, Jiang Hai just moved his mouth a few times and earned 2.4 billion Korean coins. When he thought of this number, he felt the hairs on his body suddenly stand on end. What a joke. Such a person might be able to control himself, but he couldn't. Looking at the way this person bowed, Jiang Hai didn't have the habit of bowing to others, so he just nodded and followed him in. When he walked in, he saw that the representative had already walked out of the room. Although he had a smile on his face, there was a hint of arrogance. This made Jiang Hai feel a little funny. Didn't these guys know that they were here to ask for help? "Hello, Mr. Jiang. I've heard of you for a long time." Looking at Jiang Hai, this person walked over and spoke a string of strange Chinese. Fortunately, Jiang Hai could understand. After shaking hands with him, Jiang Hai ignored him and sat directly on the sofa next to him. "Oh, Mr. Jiang, I didn't think you would come earlier." Seeing that Jiang Hai ignored him, he didn't care. After sitting opposite Jiang Hai, he slowly picked up the tea set in front of him and poured a cup of tea. Wuxia, Korea, and Japan all like to drink tea, but the tea ceremony for drinking tea was different. Japan's tea ceremony was inherited from the Tang dynasty of Wuxia. At that time, Japan was very fond of the Tang dynasty culture of Wuxia, so the tea ceremony of the Tang dynasty, including the matcha technique, was passed down to Japan. Korea's tea ceremony originated from the Song dynasty. It was somewhat similar to the tea ceremony of Wuxia. It wasn't so troublesome, but it was just vegetables, hee. Although Jiang Hai was a northeasterner, he wouldn't speak for the northeasterners on this point. There was indeed no good tea in the northeasterners. The good tea was in the Central Plains, and South Korea was about the same latitude as the northeasterners. He didn't have any good tea. Although this guy was fiddling with it, Jiang Hai knew that this thing was very ordinary. However, he didn't expose him. Instead, when he was doing it, Jiang Hai directly placed the contract in front of him. This is the quota that we think is suitable for this gentleman after discussion. You can take a look. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, this person didn't care too much. After pouring a cup of tea, he took a sip and picked up the contract to read. If you don't care about these shares, I think someone else might buy it. Looking at his leisurely manner, this made Jiang Hai a little unhappy. He crossed his legs and looked at this person as he spoke. No, Mr. Jiang, this contract can be said to be very important to me, but it can also be said to be not very important to me. It's important because this contract is an order given to me by the higher-ups, and I must complete it. It's also not important because this is an order given to me by the higher-ups. Do you know anything? I don't raise cattle. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, this person shook his head and said slowly. Hearing this person's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh. Indeed, dealing with the country was very annoying. Because the people who came might not be directly related to this matter. For example, Du Feiman, Luke Shawn, and the others had dealings with them. Because they also needed to raise cattle, Jiang Hai's pasture was closely related to them. However, dealing with people from the country, this person might have nothing to do with this matter. Just like now, it was just a political task, and it had nothing to do with him. Jiang Hai looked at him and really felt like he had punched cotton. Looking at this annoying guy in front of him, Jiang Hai said with an unhappy face, "Forget it, sign it, and leave after you sign it. If it weren't for Cheryl, you wouldn't even be able to get 100,000 tons. Hee, Mr. Jiang, you're too anxious. Although this matter has nothing to do with me, I still know the importance of this grass to the country. At the same time, some big shots in the country also want to invite Mr. Jiang Hai. If you have time, you must come to the country. At that time, they will definitely do their best to host you." Looking at Jiang Hai in front of him, a little impatient, the representative of South Korea also said with a smile. Then, he glanced at the contract and signed his name on it, as well as the seal of a department in South Korea. After everything was done, Jiang Hai was too lazy to talk nonsense with him. He directly took the contract and went back. As for going to South Korea, Jiang Hai forgot about it after he went out. To be honest, he didn't have a good impression of that country. If it wasn't necessary, he wouldn't be willing to go. After returning to his room, Jiang Hai also let out a sigh of relief. The things here were finally done. In this case, no one should come to make trouble when he goes back to celebrate the Mid-Autumn Festival tomorrow. Chapter 8:16. Americans actually like festivals, so they have a lot of festivals throughout the year. The most important holiday was naturally Christmas, followed by New Year's, and then Halloween. Although Halloween was not a holiday for adults, children were quite fond of it. There was also St. Valentine's Day, which was Valentine's Day. In addition, there was also Thanksgiving Day, Columbus Day, and so on. These were all holidays for the whole country. If there was no holiday, who would like it? But for Wuxia people, the most important festival of the year is naturally the Spring Festival, followed by the 15th day of the first lunar month. After that, it is the Dragon Boat Festival, and then the Mid-Autumn Festival. The Mid-Autumn Festival, in the eyes of the people, should be the second most important festival, after the Spring Festival. Jiang Hai is a very traditional Wuxia person, so this Mid-Autumn Festival is very important to him. On the first day, after distributing the fodder that will be produced in 2 years, Jiang Hai returned to his manor with Galina and the others. His strategy is not very good. Not only did it bring him a fortune of $2,820 million, but there are also fewer flies. When things weren't so mysterious and everything was made clear, the majority of people would give up. But there are also a small number of people who will not give up so easily, but Jiang Hai can also ignore them. After returning to his manor the next day, today is the Mid-Autumn Festival. Unknowingly, they have not seen each other for half a month. Qi Jia and the others naturally miss him, but now is not the time for them to be tired of being together. When he came back, he has a new task, which is to prepare the Mid-Autumn Festival dinner. This year should be the most complete year in Jiang Hai's manor. Jiang Hai, Qi Jia, Qia, Feng Yunxin, Ai Xiaoxi, Aphrodite, Hilda, Paige, Sheila, Osiria, Bridget, Janice, Azalina, Galena, and Wallace are all here. Even Jiang Hai specially gave Zheng Jin a half-month holiday, so that she can go back to China and take a look. While he was at it, he called back Rallis, Bearjack, Valentina, and Arlsala. It could be said that among Jiang Hai's women, only Qi Li and Du Ning were absent, except for Pra Walton and Selena Gomez, who were not in a relationship with him. Since everyone was here, this reunion festival had a purpose. A few days ago, because of the incident with Jiang Hai, these people were not in the mood to celebrate the festival. But now, they were relieved. Early in the morning, these people were busy under the command of Qia. During the Mid-Autumn Festival, in addition to fish and meat, the most important thing was the mooncakes. However, it was difficult to buy high-quality mooncakes in the US. Luckily, Qia knew how to make them. She knew last night that Jiang Hai would be back today. After the matter was settled, she started to prepare. First, she made the skin of the mooncakes. This was quite difficult. First, she needed to use oil, syrup, alkaline water, and salt. In a container, she heated it with microwave for dozens of seconds until the sugar became diluted. After that, she sifted in flour and made a skin the size of a palm. Then, she wrapped it with plastic wrap and left it for 4 hours. After that, she made the filling. Jiang Hai only liked to eat fruits, so she wrapped them with fruits. After making the syrup, she wrapped it with the skin and pressed it with a mold. After that, she knocked it down and baked it. There were some rules when baking it. At first, she had to spray a layer of water because the filling would be cooked easily. Then, she put it in and baked it for 5 minutes. Then, she took it out and brushed it with egg yolk. Then, she put it in and baked it for 7 minutes. At this time, it was basically cooked. But it did not matter. She could bake it until the color you liked. Therefore, when Jiang Hai came back, the first batch of mooncakes was ready to eat. Jiang Hai did not like to eat mooncakes. But since it was a festive occasion, he picked up a piece and took a bite. Jiang Hai was a little surprised when he took a bite. Because this mooncake was very delicious. It was really different from the one she bought, but it was a little troublesome to make. Eat it quickly. After that, you have to catch crabs. Seeing Jiang Hai eating happily, Qia was also very happy. But she still remembered that the main dish in the evening was the main dish, so she urged Jiang Hai. Okay. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai sped up. To be honest, during these days in Prawalton, although he did not suffer losses, he still missed his home very much. Jiang Hai responded briskly and finished the mooncake in a few bites. These days, although Qi Jia and the others were not in the mood to prepare for the festival, after all, it was a festival. Therefore, they had already prepared some necessary things, such as a big fish, which they had asked Edouard Anderson to do. The next morning, he sent a 4-kilogram tiger-striped fish. It was a big fish. But the most important thing was that the boss wanted to eat it. The fish had already been packed and was being pickled. Although this fish was best steamed, it could also be braised. Jiang Hai specially brought back a lot of chili seeds from China. A long, long time ago, he remembered watching a program that introduced the chili seeds in China. The 4 provinces that could eat the most spicy food were Shu Di, Xiang Province, Nandao, and Nanyun. The Shu lands and the Xiang Province mainly produced Chaotian pepper, while the southern province produced yellow lantern and Nanyun produced shabu shabu. Among them, the yellow lantern was known as the spiciest in Huaxia. Jiang Hai had also gotten a lot of seeds of this thing when he went back last time. Jiang Hai also tasted it. He had to admit that it was really spicy. In particular, Northeasterners like to eat it directly with sauce. A chili pepper could make people feel homesick. There was no way to eat this chili on its own as there was a limit to a person's tolerance. However, when it was used in cooking, the taste was quite overbearing. No matter if it was used to make internal organs or fish, the taste was quite good. There were fish, pork knuckles, and pork ribs. Just casually slaughter a fragrant pig. There were also some vegetarian dishes such as beef, mutton, donkey meat, and so on. Jiang Hai glanced at the menu and saw that there were 20 dishes. In addition to the braised fish, there were braised pork ribs, tiger skin pork knuckles, double-cooked pork with flour, kung pao chicken that had been cut, yuxiang shredded pork with seasoning, and the Argentinian red prawns that Jiang Hai had prepared a while ago. Half of them were made into large prawns, and the other half were made into garlic prawns. There were 2 beef dishes, 1 fried steak, 1 braised beef brisket in red wine, and 2 mutton dishes, 1 roasted lamb leg, 1 Xiran mutton, donkey meat sauce, and then cut it into slices to be eaten as cold dishes. There were 13 dishes. There were also chopped meat stuffing, which was prepared to be steamed lion's head. There were also some vegetables. Almost all of the Northeasterners would eat cold dishes at banquets. Vegetables with cucumber, stir-fried vegetables, the Northeasterners' famous dish, 3 delicacies, the Northeasterners' national dish, chili tofu, stir-fried broccoli, stir-fried cabbage with vermicelli, and finally, a flying dragon soup. Just the dishes that Jiang Hai saw, there were 21 dishes. Including Jiang Hai's crabs, there were 22 dishes. There were also lobsters, abalones, and sea cucumbers. These were also Jiang Hai's most delicious dishes. In addition, there were also many shellfish in the sea. If Jiang Hai was allowed to cook freely, it would not be a problem to cook hundreds of dishes. However, Chia was in charge of cooking now. Jiang Hai specifically asked if she wanted lobsters and abalones. Chia thought for a moment. Lobsters were not necessary. Recently, they had been eating more than 30 catties of lobsters, and they were a little tired. What a waste. He could get a few abalones and cook them when the time comes. Although in his heart, he was thinking that the water was a waste of God's gift. But Jiang Hai still rode his 4-wheeled motorcycle and left. Riding the motorcycle, Jiang Hai came to the seaside and greeted Edward Anderson. After confirming that there was nothing to do recently, Jiang Hai went directly to the dock, took a boat, and left. After driving the boat near the coral and the open sea, Jiang Hai also changed into a diving suit. He did not need oxygen and plunged directly into the sea. After entering the sea, Jiang Hai was like a fish in water. He ignored the water pressure. Recently, he felt that his speed at the bottom of the sea seemed to be faster than when he was moving on land. Jiang Hai had a lot of fish, but the water was quite clear. If the visibility was good, he could even see the bottom of the sea at a depth of 30 meters. Jiang Hai looked at the sea level. Soon, he found a nest of crabs. Then, like an arrow leaving the bow, he swam toward the nest of crabs in an instant. It didn't take long for him to appear next to the crabs. Jiang Hai glanced at it. This was a nest of king crabs. The so-called king crabs were technically called giant pseudoliteral crabs. They were produced in Australia. These crabs were bought by Jiang Hai and raised by him. Living in Jiang Hai's place since they were young, the size of these crabs was quite big. The biggest one was almost at the adult level, more than 30 kilograms. Compared to the average lobster, it was not inferior. Jiang Hai originally wanted to catch some of these crabs, but he thought that it would not look good if they were placed on the table. So, in the end, he only caught one that looked about 35 kilograms. He deliberately floated to the surface and threw it into the cabin. Then, he sank again. He wanted to catch some small crabs. This way, it would be easier for everyone to eat. In Jiang Hai's manner, there were many big things, and naturally, there were also many small things. As he entered the coral reef area, many small crabs, abalones, sea cucumbers, small fish, and so on entered Jiang Hai's sight. Jiang Hai's eyes lit up. He instantly found his target this time. Chapter 8:17. Treasure Crab. This was Jiang Hai's current goal. Treasure crab was actually quite famous in the United States. Of course, it was also somewhat famous in China. But it wasn't very common. This kind of crab was also called yuanbao crab. It was round and looked very fun to play with. At the same time, this kind of crab tasted quite good, especially the meat yield. It was quite high. Ordinary blue crabs were not native crabs in the Atlantic Ocean. The meat yield was already very high as 15%. That meant that one caddy of crabs could produce 50 grams of crab meat. This wasn't a small amount. Ordinary swimming crabs had a meat yield of around 10%, but treasure crab had a meat yield of up to 24%. But this kind of crab was mainly produced in the Pacific Ocean. Jiang Hai was now in the Atlantic Ocean, so treasure crab shouldn't appear here. But just like the Argentinian red shrimp that should appear in the Antarctic, treasure crab appeared here. Jiang Hai had discovered these crabs a long time ago. But these crabs weren't many, so they couldn't be sold for money. But it was enough to eat. After confirming these crabs, Jiang Hai also snuck to their side. He started to catch them one by one. Generally, people who had never caught crabs before would easily be caught by the crabs. But Jiang Hai wasn't an ordinary person. With his reaction speed and experience, he wouldn't be caught by the crabs. One by one, the crabs were quickly picked up by Jiang Hai. After all, the crabs were still alive in the sea. The meat of the crabs was quite plump, unlike the crabs bought in places far away from the coastline. The meat inside the crabs was a lot hollowed out. This was actually a very normal law of nature. After a crab was caught, it wouldn't eat anymore. What it consumed was the meat inside its body. But when the fishermen caught the crabs and sold them to the merchants wouldn't only sell them for a day. After a week, the crabs would become empty. No one could do anything about it. Not only in Wuxia, but also in the United States, people who didn't live by the sea couldn't buy good crabs. But then again, why did people in Wuxia eat crabs during the Mid-Autumn Festival? Actually, there was a reason for this. When did the custom of eating crabs during the Mid-Autumn Festival start? Jiang Hai was not sure, but he was sure that it must have been eaten during the Tang Dynasty, because Li Bai once wrote a poem, "The crab claws are the golden liquid, and the dunes are the peng lai. You must drink good wine and get drunk on the high platform under the moon." Here, the crab leg was compared to a golden pill that could ascend to immortality. Su Shi of the Song dynasty was also a person who liked to eat crabs. He would not live up to his eyes until he reached Mount Lu, and would not live up to his stomach until he ate crabs. That was what he said. There was also an old saying that went, "When the autumn wind blows, the crab's feet itch." Therefore, he didn't know when it started, but every year after the beginning of autumn, it was a good time to eat crabs. The first festival after Liqiu was the Mid-Autumn Festival. However, according to Jiang Hai's estimation, the crabs that the ancients praised should be river crabs. Sea crabs didn't seem to be eaten by many people. But Jiang Hai didn't care about that. As long as there were crabs to eat, that was the happiest thing. After catching about 30 crabs, Jiang Hai began to look for the abalones. Jiang Hai had a lot of abalones, and they were all wild. They were all lying on the reefs and corals. Holding a small knife, one abalone was cut off. Jiang Hai naturally picked the biggest one. Soon, he got about 60 abalones and put them in the bag that he carried with him. He had to admit that Jiang Hai's abalones and treasure crabs were extraordinarily big. The biggest treasure crabs were 1.5 kilograms. Jiang Hai picked abalones that were more than 2 kilograms. That meant that 30 abalones would weigh about 70 kilograms. As for the abalones, Jiang Hai picked one that was more than 1 kilogram. Although 1 kilogram of abalones wasn't the standard abalone weight, it was still very scary. More than 60 abalones meant more than 60 kilograms. In total, it was more than 130 kilograms. If it wasn't Shanghai, it would be very difficult for ordinary people to get up. Carrying 2 huge bags, Shanghai swam to the side of the boat. Then, he threw the 2 bags onto the boat. After flipping onto the boat, he couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. Although he could breathe underwater, he didn't know if it was a psychological effect, but he always felt a little suffocated. It was more comfortable to breathe on the boat. After taking off his diving suit, Shanghai wiped off the water droplets on his body. After changing into his own clothes, he quickly drove the boat to the dock. After putting the 2 bags of seafood and the huge king crab on the 4-wheeled motorcycle, he directly rode the motorcycle and drove towards his home. Not long after, Shanghai returned to his villa. Seeing that Shanghai came back with seafood, the women immediately welcomed him and began to help him clean up these things. In fact, the abalones and crabs didn't need to be cleaned up too much. After all, they weren't like ordinary shellfish. After ordinary shellfish were brought up, they needed to be cleaned up and then put in clear water to let them spit out mud. Otherwise, they couldn't be eaten at all. A mouthful of shellfish meat and half a mouthful of sand. How could they be eaten? Although abalones were also shellfish, because their meat was very big, it was mainly the problem of the shell. The internal organs and other things had to be thrown away when eating them. As for crabs, although they also ate mud, because they only ate the meat inside, it was still okay. What? Eating yellow? Actually, the sea crabs didn't have yellow anymore around mid-autumn. Sea crabs bred in April and May, which meant that they only had yellow then. They didn't have yellow in September. And river crabs had yellow at this time because they still had to abide by the rules of land creatures. They mated in spring and laid eggs in autumn. Therefore, eating sea crabs now was just eating meat. However, although these 2 things didn't need to be cleaned up to spit out sand, the abalones still needed to be brushed. The main thing was to brush off the dirt on the shell. This way, when it was cooked later, it would taste better. One had to admit that sometimes, it was easier to do things with more people. Under the efforts of Aphrodite and the others, the abalone's shells were quickly prepared. Looking at the time, Chia ordered everyone to start cooking together. Shanghai, go pick up Tarak. Looking at the busy crowd, Jialina, who was originally going to pick up Taraga, couldn't help but push this job to Shanghai. These days, Jialina came to pick up Tarak to and from school. Okay. In Winthrop, Shanghai wasn't afraid that someone would deal with him, so he responded with a smile. Although today was the Mid-Autumn Festival, the schools in the United States wouldn't have a holiday because of the traditional festival of the Wuxia, so Tarak still had to go to school. Hearing Jialina's words, Shanghai also stood up from the sofa, picked up the car key, and left home. Qi Jia and Chia were quite spoiled by Shanghai. In fact, Feng Yunshan and Ai Xiaoxi were also quite spoiled by Shanghai. In their opinion, what a man should do and what a woman should do were not the same. For example, cleaning the house, cooking, and the like. This was what a woman should do. A man shouldn't intervene casually. Shanghai was a lazy person. He liked their idea very much, so he usually didn't work if he could. But picking up people and so on, Shanghai was still very happy. Taking the car key, Shanghai got on his battle shield. Touching the car again, Shanghai was filled with emotions. In a sense, this car had saved him twice. If he had to say which car he bought the best, it was undoubtedly this one. The one he bought the most useless was the Rolls-Royce. Since he bought the car, Shanghai had driven it less than 20 times. It was really because there was no need to drive this car. Shanghai didn't go out to talk about business, and he didn't go out to show off. Besides, his battle shield was enough for him to show off. Moreover, he didn't have enough important guests to drive this car to meet. He was even considering whether to give this car to Zheng Jin. After all, she was now the general manager of his company. It was not too much to give her a good car. While thinking, Jiang Hai drove the car and quickly left the manor. He went to the only high school in Winthrop. When he arrived, he found that there were only a few minutes left before school ended. There were a lot of cars lined up in front of the school gate. Jiang Hai parked the car directly outside. But just as his car stopped, many car owners in front of him looked at him. But they just looked at him. Jiang Hai and they were not in the same dimension. However, they still heard about the storm that happened a while ago. Now that they saw Jiang Hai here, it meant that his matter has been resolved. Just as they were looking at Jiang Hai, the school bell rang, signaling the end of the school day. American high schools and Wuxia high schools were still fundamentally different. American high schools ended very early, and there was almost no tuition. Of course, if you joined the extracurricular activities club, that was another story. But generally speaking, American high school students didn't end school later than 5 o'clock in the evening. If you still want to study and get into a good university, you have to go back and study by yourself or find a tutor. But Taraga didn't need this at the moment because she still couldn't keep up. Winthrop school ended at 4:30 every day. The bell rang. After waiting for about 10 minutes, Taraga walked out of the school gate with two girls, one in black and one in white. These two should be her good friends. When she saw Jiang Hai, a smile appeared on her face instantly. Looking at the smile on her face, Jiang Hai was also very pleased. Chapter 8:18. The Mid-Autumn Festival banquet was like the dumplings they had eaten that day. The people in Jiang Hai's manor unknowingly grew closer. In the evening, Aphrodite and the others took the initiative to retreat, giving Jiang Hai to Qi Jia, Chia, Ai Xiaoxi, and Feng Yinchen. It was said that absence made the heart grow fonder. Although Jiang Hai was full at Prawalton's, he always felt that something was missing in his heart. He had quite a lot of bad habits. He was greedy for money, lustful, and had all the shortcomings that ordinary men had. Just like he said, he was just an ordinary person who got lucky. However, he was human and had his own preferences. Just like an ancient king, he had plenty of women, but he also had his own favorite woman. At least for now, Jiang Hai's favorite people were Chia and Ai Xiaoxi. That night, the five of them played together until very late before going to bed. Reflecting the round moon outside, Jiang Hai hugged Ai Xiaoxi on his left and Chia on his right. To be honest, he was quite satisfied with his current life. Tightening his arms, Jiang Hai closed his eyes and fell asleep. After waking up the next day, Jiang Hai returned to his previous ordinary life. It seems that the trouble caused by Du Feynman has subsided at this time, but only Jiang Hai knows that his income has increased. This world is unfair, the poor people are getting poorer and poorer, while the rich people are getting richer and richer. This is the reality. Jiang Hai was not a saint. He was too lazy to change the world. He just felt that his current life was quite good. Wasn't that enough? He was so narrow-minded, but there was no one who was not selfish. He admitted that he did not have such great feelings. Compared to saving mankind, he preferred the current him. If he wanted to eat good food, he could eat anything he wanted. He could eat anything he wanted, be it flying in the sky, running on the ground, swimming in the water, walking in the mountains, birds in the clouds, cows and sheep on land, or seafood in the sea. He could eat anything he wanted. He was surrounded by beauties, and they all listened to him. Blue skies, white clouds, and a stress-free life. What was there to be dissatisfied about? Jiang Hai was very satisfied. He was very satisfied with the current world and his current life. In the next few days, Jiang Hai's life was just like it was now, quiet and full. Jiang Hai's manor was also gradually changing. The outermost wall of the manor had already been built. In other words, the expansion of the manor was complete. As the weather turned colder, it was obvious that Jiang Hai's land was different from the land he had just annexed. Jiang Hai's original manor was still lush and green. The grass was still growing. Even though the temperature outside was only over 10 degrees, the grass did not show any signs of yellow. It was still green and still growing. However, the newly annexed grasslands had already started to yellow and dry up. Jiang Hai was waiting for this moment. In October, Jiang Hai and Robbins Garcia also started their own plan. They used the machinery in the manor a week in advance to dig a fire trench around the grasslands. The so-called fire trench was actually just a trench. This trench was about 1 meter deep and 1 meter wide. It was to prevent fire from reaching it. Then, taking advantage of a cool autumn day, Jiang Hai lit up the newly annexed grasslands that had completely withered. This was his plan. Jiang Hai had said before that he was going to plant emperor bamboo grass and alfalfa. However, the original grass here could not be abandoned at any time. Jiang Hai's cows would not eat if they were fed directly to the cows. Therefore, instead of letting them occupy this place, it was better to burn it directly. Then, the grass would turn into ashes and nourish the earth. Of course, the weeds could not be completely burned because as long as a grass root was not burned to ashes, the grass would grow again next spring. However, would Jiang Hai give them a chance to grow? The emperor bamboo grass and alfalfa could not only be used as pasture, but they could also be used to control weeds, especially on the pasture that had been nourished by Jiang Hai's aura. Phew, boss, this scene is really spectacular. Looking at the flames rising like a fire tornado in front of him, Robbins Garcia, who was standing on the other side of the fire trench, couldn't help but smile at Jiang Hai. To be honest, he rarely saw such a scene. This was because in the United States, almost no one would burn grass. This was because the grass produced in the United States was also pasture. It's just that it wasn't the best kind of pasture. This kind of grass could also be sold for money. Usually, when people raise cattle and horses, these grasses were not enough to eat. Every winter, they would buy grasses to feed the livestock. Who would be like Jiang Hai, who would directly burn these grasses? These grasses can't create wealth for us. Have you contacted the seeds of the alfalfa and the emperor bamboo grass that I want? Looking at Robbins Garcia's pitiful gaze in front of him, Jiang Hai said with a smile. Now, the pasture in his manor could not be finished no matter how much he ate, so he did not feel pity for these grasses. I've already contacted them. When spring comes next year, we can plant them. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Robbins Garcia couldn't help but smile and say. In fact, he really admired Jiang Hai. He had stayed here for long enough, so he naturally knew the situation of this original green forest manor. But Jiang Hai was like a miracle man. Since he came, everything here had changed. Originally, the pasture could only raise ordinary cattle, but now, it could raise the best beef cattle. The fish that was originally just an ordinary fishery was now the best in the world. Even the originally inconspicuous grassland was now turned into a money-making thing by Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai, in his eyes, was truly a miraculous person. His existence had changed everything around him. Robbins Garcia, who followed him, was naturally a person who changed. The first thing that changed was his economic situation. Robbins Garcia was very clear about how hard it used to be a cowboy. But after Jiang Hai came, his cowboy career became the most profitable profession in the area. The second thing that changed was their social status. In the past, the cowboy did not have a high social status. But now, in Winthrop, although Robbins Garcia's words might not be as effective as Mayor Wallace's, they were definitely more effective than the ordinary town staff and some famous people. This was his change. With money and a higher social status, what reason did he have not to work hard for Jiang Hai? Hey, this is a lot of money. We can't make any mistakes. Hearing Robbins Garcia's words, Jiang Hai touched his nose and smiled. Like he said, he was definitely going to make a profit. The fire burned for 2 days and 1 night. It gradually died down in the evening of the 3rd day. The extinguished pasture was like the end of the world. Everything was black and gray, and the whole world smelled different. This was because the fire not only burned the grassland, but also the insects in the grass, the hidden rabbits, and the pheasants. The fire had burned them all. Although Jiang Hai and the others deliberately searched the area before burning it, this place was very big. There were bound to be some fish that escaped the net. The most important thing was that there would definitely be a lot of rats here. This was inevitable. But now, these guys had turned into charcoal. When the wind blew, other than the burnt smell, there was only a burnt smell. From time to time, in some hidden places, there would be some places that hadn't been completely burned, still emitting faint flames. Looking at this scene, to be honest, Jiang Hai felt a little panicked in his heart. But fortunately, his ability to adapt was fast. After the fire was extinguished for a night, Jiang Hai brought Robbins Garcia, Philemon Turner, Harriman Fell, Bennett Rodney, and Eleanor Cece, who were specially transferred over. They drove the huge tractor in his manor and began plowing the pasture. Of course, they weren't really plowing the ground and preparing to plant anything. They were doing this mainly to turn the soil upside down. The ashes of the plants that had just been burned were still very soft, but now that it was cold, a frost or rain would cause the ashes to congeal. At that time, not only would these things not be able to nourish the soil, but it would also have a negative effect on the soil. It would form a layer of crust on the soil, preventing the seeds from being planted properly. Now, they were turning the ground and mixing the ashes together. After a while, when it snows, the heavy snow would cover the ground and completely mix the ashes together. Next year, they only needed to sprinkle grass seeds on the ground, and Jiang Hai could wait for them to resurrect. Because they didn't need to be very detailed, Jiang Hai's 3 tractors were busy for the whole day. They had already plowed through more than 15,000 acres of land. After that, everyone went to rest. The matter of the new grassland came to an end. Jiang Hai once again returned to his favorite leisurely state. To be honest, sometimes Jiang Hai felt a little bored. He did not want to just lie here all day long. When he first came here, he was still a little busy. However, Jiang Hai Bei also knew that this was when he first arrived. At that time, he had a lot of things to do because he was very curious about everything. He went fishing in the river, rode horses, herded cows, and even went to the town to play. But now, after staying here for 2 years, Jiang Hai found that he really had nothing to do. He was a little bored. But he had to admit that God liked to torture people. Just when Jiang Hai felt that there was nothing to do, his phone rang. Chapter 8:19. Hello, Chi-Li, why are you calling me at this time, what's the matter? Looking at the caller, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be a little puzzled, because it was just past 10 o'clock in the morning. He had just walked around the manor and had breakfast. There was a 13-hour time gap between the Eastern American time and the Imperial Capital time, which meant that it was already 11 o'clock in the middle of the night in the Imperial Capital. At this time, Chi-Li would usually be asleep. Since she reached some agreements with Jiang Hai, Chi-Li was relieved a lot. She wouldn't be too busy with her career and ignore her health. Basically, her daily sitting time, Du Ning also told him that she would wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and do some exercises, but unlike her sister, she preferred to do yoga. After waking up in the morning and doing some yoga at home for a while, she would go to work at 8 o'clock. Du Ning was now her assistant and bodyguard. Even if he lived with her, but not in the same room. Around 11 o'clock in the morning, she would call Jiang Hai. Just when Jiang Hai was at 10 o'clock in the evening, she would video call him. After 10 minutes, she would hang up. Then she would go to lunch, and Jiang Hai would sleep. After lunch, she would work until around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and then take a car home. Since sending Ai Xiaoxi and Feng Yunshan to Jiang Hai, she didn't work overtime. Every day, she would get off work at 5 o'clock, and then go to any of the 4 restaurants to inspect them. After dinner, she would go home, watch TV for a while, or deal with documents, and go to bed around 10 o'clock. This was also her daily schedule. And now it's 11 o'clock in the evening, what the hell is this? Why did she call Jiang Hai at this time? Something really happened. I just got the news that our plane was detained. Listening to Jiang Hai's voice, Qi on the other side couldn't help but let out a long sigh, and then said helplessly. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was stunned. The plane was detained? What does this mean? Just as he was about to ask, he realized that Jing Jin had also called him. Jing Jin also called. Looking at Qi, Jiang Hai said immediately. Let's do a three-way video call. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Qi also said seriously. This matter is really important. After hearing what she said, Jiang Hai also turned on the three-way call. In an instant, Jing Jin and Qi Li's faces appeared in front of Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai, bad news. Our plane has been detained by the South Koreans. As soon as the video started, Jing Jin couldn't help but say sternly. At that moment, she realized that not only was Jiang Hai on the other side of the video, but there was also Qi Li. I just got the news and wanted to tell Jiang Hai about it. It seems that we got the news at about the same time. Looking at Jing Jin, who was a little confused in front of her, Qi Li smiled and said seriously. Wait, did you just say that it was South Korea who detained our plane? Jiang Hai frowned when he heard the words of the two. South Korea? A while ago, he just did a business with that country. What do these guys mean? Dare to detain his people? Yes, we are very sure that the people who detained the plane are South Korea. There are 30 tons of frozen beef in that plane. This is the amount to be sent to Wuxia this week. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Jing Jin also said with certainty. After all, the plane was stopped in Incheon, South Korea. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai frowned. These guys, are they looking for death? The news I got was that the plane's engine had some problems. When we flew to South Korea, we landed at the airport of South Korea. They said that we needed to repair it, but after landing, they said that our plane was carrying contraband. Not only did they detain the plane and the goods, but they also detained the people. After hearing Jing Jin's words, Qi also said seriously. This is only an occasional stop, and it is allowed. This is not uncommon internationally. After all, a plane has to fly from the United States to Wuxia. If there is any small problem with such a long distance, it needs to be repaired immediately. There are often some passenger planes that have some small problems, and then they stop in some countries or regions midway. Although Jiang Hai has not encountered such a thing, such things do happen, but they are like South Korea, directly detaining the plane. Such a move has never happened before. No wonder Qi was awakened in the middle of the night. The things on that plane can pass the customs inspection of the United States and Wuxia. Now these people from South Korea are causing trouble. I just received news that their officials asked our company's legal representative to solve this problem. At this moment, a person appeared next to Jing Jin. This person is not someone else. It is Valentina, who went back to work after spending the Mid-Autumn Festival with Jiang Hai. She handed Jing Jin a piece of paper, but looking at her face, it is not good news. After reading this piece of paper, Jing Jin's face was also very ugly, and she said to Jiang Hai with a serious face. Their target this time should be me. Hearing Jing Jin's words, Jiang Hai disdainfully chuckled. He seemed to understand what these people wanted to do. A few days ago, although Jiang Hai hadn't planted any new pasture, he still hadn't harvested it. But among the 17 forces, except for Du Feimin and Luke Shan, the others asked to see Jiang Hai's manor, but they were rejected by Jiang Hai. They could only look from afar, but they got Jiang Hai's soil and pasture. Jiang Hai is naturally very clear about what to do with these things, but he is confident that these guys can't decipher his secrets. It seems that South Korea should have discovered something recently, or not, so they came to Jiang Hai, hoping that Jiang Hai can go to their country as a guest. As for whether there will be any danger or an ambush after going, no one knows. The politics of a country are extremely dirty. If it was before today, even if they sent an invitation, Jiang Hai would not go, but now his plane and personnel are detained there, so this time he has to go. Because Jiang Hai's situation is somewhat special. First, after all, he does not own a particularly large company. His company mainly serves himself, so even if he wants to borrow the power of Prawalton, the position of Walmart is not firm enough. Second, although Jiang Hai is a rich man in the United States, he is a Wuxia citizen. But in Wuxia, he does not have any property. In other words, although he has a high reputation in the local area, whether it is the American government or the Wuxia government, they will not stand up for Jiang Hai. In such a case, Jiang Hai can only rely on himself, or give up the plane's cargo. But to be honest, Jiang Hai is not the kind of person who will swallow his loss. Jiang Hai, you shouldn't go. Looking at Jiang Hai's face, Qi said affirmatively after pondering on the phone, but Jiang Hai smiled. Looking at his smile, Qi sighed. She knows that Jiang Hai has made up his mind. Although I don't know who those people are, they work for me and have been detained. I must go and take a look, but I'm worried that those guys may be targeting me, so. In a while, Jingjin, you go in the name of the company and ask them what they want to do. If they want someone to go, you go, and I'll quietly follow. After thinking about it, Jiang Hai decided that one would be in the light and the other would be in the dark. He wanted to see what the South Korean people wanted to do. If there was an accident, he could escape by himself. No. But as soon as Jiang Hai's words came out, the two people on the other side said in unison. Hearing Qi Li's words, Jingjin stopped talking and waited for Qi Li to explain to Jiang Hai. You know that their target is you. If you go there quietly and no one knows, it will be very dangerous. After all, they are a country. Although they are not like some closed countries where no one knows what happened, if they want to make trouble for you in their own country, you can't escape. So if you want to go, you have to go brazenly. Go there with gongs and drums. You have to make this matter known to everyone. Then you go there. In this way, they won't dare to do anything to you in private. Looking at Jiang Hai's puzzled look, Qi Li also explained to him. Hearing Qi Li's explanation, Jiang Hai also patted his head. That seemed to be the case. No matter how strong he was only one person. If those people wanted to play tricks on him, even if he could escape, he would still be in danger. However, if he went out in a big way, as a developed country, they naturally wouldn't dare to do anything to him. Everyone knew that North Korea hated Americans and detained American reporters and so on. But when Rodman went there, he was welcomed by everyone. Everything was easy to talk about. This was the power of language. Even North Korea was like this, let alone South Korea, who claimed to be a developed country. Hearing Qi Li's words, Jiang Hai also nodded. Indeed, in this regard, Qi Li knows more than him. Okay, then send it in my name and ask them what they want to do. Looking at the two women in front of him, Jiang Hai said seriously. Then how do we make this matter big? Seeing that Jiang Hai agreed, Qi Li also breathed a sigh of relief, but then she asked with some depression. After all, she knew very well about Jiang Hai's situation in the United States. In terms of influence, Jiang Hai is only limited to Winthrop and Boston. His influence in Massachusetts is not big. How to make this matter big is a very troublesome matter. But hearing this, Jiang Hai smiled. Because for him, it is not too troublesome to make this matter big because he also has his own resources. Chapter 820. Welcome to XXX Evening News. Below is a piece of news from faraway Asia. According to our reporter's understanding, yesterday morning, a transport plane from our country to Wuxia stopped at South Korea's Incheon International Airport because of a malfunction. However, it was detained by the South Korean authorities. After our station understood the situation, we immediately consulted the South Korean authorities. The South Korean authorities said that they detained the plane because they received news that there were contraband items in the plane. Based on this point of view, we can ask our country's experts whether the actions of the South Korean authorities comply with the laws and regulations. Almost at 7 p.m. the next day, all the TV stations, as long as they were broadcasting news, reported about the detention incident. Of course, don't think that this was because it was good news material for the United States. In fact, it did not matter whether this news was broadcasted or not. The reason why all the TV stations reported it was because Jiang Hai had called someone. This person was called John Malone. At the same time, he had paid 100,000 tons of fodder. If not, do you think these capitalists would help him? And the reason why John Malone was able to help Jiang Hai was because of this old man. Speaking of John Malone, in fact, most people did not know who he was. Even if they had some understanding of him, they would only know that he was once a shareholder and general manager of a cable television company. Later, he became the largest landlord in the United States. More people knew about him through a book written by the media tycoon, Rupert Murdoch. His biggest characteristic was that he kept a low profile. In fact, he was not worse than Rupert Murdoch. In fact, during his peak, he was the most powerful media tycoon. Speaking of cable TV stations, the Americans knew the TV stations the most. The people in China only knew about TV stations. This was because the NBA and American dramas that they watched were all imported or produced by these TV stations. Many people in China knew about these TV stations. CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, Fox, and Fox Broadcasting. These 5 were known as the top 5 broadcasting companies in the United States. But in fact, Jiang Hai wanted to say that these 5 broadcasters were just the tip of the iceberg. In the United States, the biggest radio and television company was called Comcast. The biggest internet service provider was called AT&T, Comcast, Time Warner, and Viacom were the true giants of the television industry. They were the 3 largest media companies in the United States, but now there were only 2 left. Last year, Comcast had merged with Time Warner. Before the new era, Time Warner was not considered the top 2. In that era, the largest company was still Comcast, but the second largest was TCI, and the third largest was Media One. Speaking of which, it was all thanks to AT&T. It was precisely because AT&T's subsidiary company had merged with TCI in 1998 and Media One in 1999 that Comcast was able to take advantage of the loopholes. It acquired AT&T Broadband for $72 billion and became the most powerful company in the industry. As for John Malone, he was the boss of TCI. He had turned TCI into the second largest broadcasting company in the United States. Although it had been acquired, his influence and power were still there. Not only did they give him a huge sum of money, but his words also carried a certain amount of weight in Comcast. He said that he would pay attention to this news. So tonight, all the TV stations broadcasting the evening news were paying attention to this incident. It could be said that the South Korea government did not expect this. Almost everyone in the world knew overnight that South Korea had detained a plane from the United States Tinglong Company to Wuxia. The plane was filled with the best beef, and the estimated price was $26,455,200. This price was not inflated. Jiang Hai's price was $400 per pound of beef, which was 30 tons. It had been detained for a day. The legal representative of the Tinglong Company said that if the beef went bad, he would sue the South Korea government and ask for compensation. Of course, they would not pay the price, but according to the retail price and the contract price with the restaurant in Wuxia. At the same time, in order to solve this problem, the legal representative of the Tinglong Company, Mr. Jiang Hai, would also go to South Korea. This was a ruthless move. Almost as soon as the news was broadcasted, the South Korea government was stunned. They detained Jiang Hai's plane because they were hot-headed. They felt that this might lead Jiang Hai to South Korea. When that time came, Jiang Hai would be at their mercy. Even if Jiang Hai did not dare to come, they could only suffer in silence. Just as they thought, Jiang Hai did not have the power to go against a country. His good friend, Du Feynman, and the others also did not care about South Korea's matters. So, in their opinion, if Jiang Hai was smart, then they could only pinch their noses and admit it. If he was not smart, then he could not blame them. However, no matter how they thought about it, they did not expect Jiang Hai to have the power to make almost all the television stations in the United States pay attention to such a trivial matter during the evening news, This time, South Korea will be in trouble. Jiang Hai has already made it clear that he will go. Moreover, he is going with the eyes of almost all the people in the world. If he encounters any trouble in South Korea, then the South Korea authorities will have a hard time dealing with it. So, the people who wanted to mess with Jiang Hai the most became Jiang Hai's protectors. Something could happen to Jiang Hai, but it definitely could not happen in South Korea. Otherwise, it would be a devastating blow to South Korea's international reputation. Detain someone's plane, lure their legal representative over, and then the legal representative met with an accident? Thinking about those Gaonanli officials, they couldn't help but feel a chill down their spine. They knew that Jiang Hai was with them. Absolutely, nothing can happen to him. As for the fuse, the 30 tons of beef, well, according to the statement jointly sent by Moses Adams and Chi Li's lawyers in China, the actual price of 1 ton of beef was $26,455,200, and the actual price of the beef was $34,501,800. There was also the calculation of the delayed transportation fee, the restaurant's sales time, and so on. If this batch of beef did not go bad, then they would sue South Korea for $10 million. If this batch of beef did go bad, then they would sue South Korea for $100 million. Moreover, they requested that the beef only be chilled and not frozen, because it would affect the taste. It was well known that chilled food, whether it was fish or beef, could only be kept for 7 days at most. Jiang Hai took 1 day to slaughter the beef and 1 day to transport it. Now that he was detained, it would take another day for Jiang Hai to come over. In other words, the beef had already been stored for 3 days, plus the day they had to hand it over. Currently, South Korea's authorities had 3 days to solve this problem, or they would have to pay $100 million. That was close to 120 billion won. For a country, this was not a small sum. Of course, it was not clear whether they would pay that much in the end, but Jiang Hai could afford to lose 30 tons of beef. It was only about 50 or 60 cows, and each cow was worth $2,000, which was about $100,000. However, South Korea could not afford to lose that much. Especially after the plane was taken away, the person in charge of watching over the plane had already said that the plane was handed over to him to watch over. If anything happened, it would be his responsibility. 120 billion. Even if that person's entire family died, he wouldn't be able to afford it. Therefore, after he heard the news, he called almost every day to urge the authorities to think of a solution. This time, it was Jiang Hai's turn to come over unhurriedly. One had to admit that sometimes, connections were really important. If Jiang Hai did not know John Malone, if he did not have what John Malone wanted, he could only give up the plane dejectedly, just like what South Korea's authorities had imagined. However, the problem was that Jiang Hai had it. With this layer of relationship, Jiang Hai was currently the focus of the whole world. If nothing happened to him and he successfully got the plane back, then it would not be long before everything calmed down. However, if something happened to him, then South Korea's losses would be far more than just compensation. After a phone call, the situation of Jiang Hai and Nan Gaoli, who were originally opposing each other, was directly reversed. Now, the choice was in Nan Gaoli's hands, not Jiang Hai's. Of course, Jiang Hai himself would not easily put himself in danger. After communicating with Chi Li and Jing Jin, the next day, Jiang Hai took Azalina, Galina, and Hua Lizi, as well as Cheryl Li, who he specially called over. They chartered a commercial passenger plane and flew to South Korea. Jiang Hai, whether you believe it or not, this matter really has nothing to do with me. I'm just a messenger, that's all. Sitting in the spacious passenger plane, Jiang Hai looked around. This plane was chartered by him, but he now wanted to buy one. He just asked, and a plane was only tens of millions of dollars. Of course, he was not referring to a big plane. He was not short of money now. But unlike Jiang Hai, who was relaxed, Cheryl Li was really nervous now. Sitting next to Jiang Hai, this was the 13th time she had explained that she had nothing to do with this matter. I know that you don't have so much power to do this. The reason why I brought you this time is firstly because you set up the line over there. You have to know what happened. Secondly, it's also because you told me that you would be my tour guide. Looking at Cheryl Lee's appearance, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. It seems like this girl was scared to death. Chapter 8:21. The first reason why Jiang Hai caught her was naturally because of the 2 points he mentioned above. The second was to scare her. If it weren't for her, he wouldn't have built a bridge with South Korea. These guys are really ungrateful. They want my grass here, but they want to trip me over there. They are really shameless. He knew that South Korea's people were shameless before, but he didn't expect them to be so brazen. Looking at Cheryl Lee's frightened look in front of him, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile. He wanted her to be afraid, but she wasn't afraid. Jiang Hai did this because he wanted to vent his anger on her. If it weren't for her, Jiang Hai wouldn't give South Korea a chance. However, Jiang Hai wouldn't do anything to her. As she said, she was just a mouthpiece. She couldn't play any role. Moreover, she was Pra Walton's girlfriend. Jiang Hai could only scare her at most. Okay, don't scare her. She has slept with you so many times. Even if she didn't take credit, she still worked hard. Moreover, she was the one who tipped me off about Pra Walton last time. Watching Jiang Hai scaring Cheryl Lee, Azalina, who was sitting next to him and watching Wallace fiddling with the data, glanced at Jiang Hai and said to him. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also shrugged, then looked at Cheryl Lee in amusement. This girl is really interesting. Don't worry, after arriving at South Korea, I will definitely be a good guide. Hearing Jiang Hai stop talking, Cheryl Lee couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Then she said to Jiang Hai with a serious face as if she was expressing her determination. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also nodded with a smile, then continued to drink the juice in front of him. After flying in the clouds for a long time, the plane arrived at its destination, Incheon International Airport. After getting permission to land, Jiang Hai's private plane also slowly descended from the clouds. He could see the South Korea Incheon International Airport in the distance. Looking down through the clouds, Jiang Hai also saw a rather crowded area in Luzai. This was quite different from the airports in Wuxia and the United States. There were not many buildings around the airports in Wuxia because most of the major airports were built outside the city. But in South Korea, to be honest, they don't have much land to build an airport. Their capital, Seoul, does not have an airport. If they want to take a plane, they must come to Incheon. After all, South Korea only had a total of 100,000 square kilometers of land, while their population was 56 million. They don't have any specialties, their economy is not particularly developed, and their military is even worse. They might not even be able to defeat North Korea. However, such a country is always clamoring that they are the Republic of Korea. Everything good in the world is theirs. Even the universe is theirs. Well, their national pride is a bit unbearable. In the past, Jiang Hai was also a keyboard warrior. In the world of keyboard warriors, there are 2 countries that he hates the most. One is Sakura, and the other is South Korea. They are also the only 2 countries on this planet that can be compared to shameless. With a slight tremor, the plane landed on the runway of South Korea's Incheon Airport. After that, the plane went to the nearby parking lot and connected to the covered bridge. Jiang Hai and his team got off the plane. At present, Jiang Hai's team has a total of 12 people. In addition to Jiang Hai, Cheryl Lee, Azalina, Galina, and Wallace, there are 7 other people. But 5 of these 7 people are from the Tinglong Company, and 2 of them are hired bodyguards to protect these 5 people from the Tinglong Company. These 5 people were sent by the Tinglong Company to negotiate with the South Korea government. These people were carrying briefcases and file bags. They were dressed in suits and ties. Under the protection of 2 bodyguards, they walked forward with serious faces. When they walked out, they really looked like they had something to do. Because it was a private plane, Jiang Hai and the others took the VIP channel. However, unlike the general VIP channel, there were a lot of people waiting in the South Korea VIP channel. These people all had a unified name, fans. As mentioned earlier, South Korea has nothing to export or sell. So, they are mainly exporting culture. The so-called Korean wave, under the intentional interference of the government, can be said to have nearly 1/3 of South Korea's economy supported by their so-called idols. They have a lot of die-hard fans abroad, even more so in China. So these people waiting outside the VIP channel are here to see the stars. When Jiang Hai and his team came out, many people paid attention to them. But after looking at them, they don't seem to know who Jiang Hai and his team are. Jiang Hai and his team are all foreigners. Except for Jiang Hai and Cheryl Lee, who are yellow-skinned, they know everyone else. And Jiang Hai's appearance, to be honest, has not reached the level of a sissy. So these people just glanced at Jiang Hai and didn't riot. But at this time, another group of people came out of the VIP channel. As soon as they came out, some sharp-eyed fans saw them and then screamed loudly. "Ah, Appa. Gay Appa. Fuck the waves." The sound waves rose in an instant, scaring Jiang Hai. Then, he saw the fans rushing over like a flood. Fortunately, South Korea's security team is very dedicated to this situation. They immediately surrounded these people, trying to separate them. But no matter how experienced these security guards are, it is impossible for them to squeeze through hundreds of people. The shrinking circle shrank in an instant. And Jiang Hai and his team didn't have time to go out, they were directly surrounded by these people. They were forced to keep retreating. Jiang Hai is indeed strong, he has the strength of 8 people, but 8 people can't withstand the push of hundreds of people. For a while, he can only protect Azalina, Walisai, Galina, and Cheryl in his arms. Azalina and the other 2 were looking around, they want to see if there are people targeting Jiang Hai here. But after glancing around, they found that there seems to be no one targeting Jiang Hai. In fact, with their strength, or Jiang Hai's strength, they can go against the flow of people and squeeze out. But they can go out, but the people of the Tinglong Company and Cheryl can't go out, so they can only keep being pushed back. After thinking about it, Jiang Hai decided not to go out for the time being. He will return to the VIP channel and go out after the riot here is over. He also made a gesture to the 2 bodyguards over there. The security guards, who were also squeezed like a boat, also reacted. They protected the 5 people who were already a little dumbfounded and retreated to the VIP channel. "Thank you, everyone, thank you. You must pay attention to the arrangements, be careful not to get hurt." Unlike Jiang Hai and his team, there was a man among the group of people who came out later. He was being protected by the security guards while waving his hand happily. Jiang Hai didn't understand what he was saying. Jiang Hai only knew that he was being pushed back, and that guy was blocking his position. After all, this circle was only so big. Jiang Hai had no choice but to squeeze past this guy. However, Jiang Hai was carrying 4 girls, so when he walked, it was inevitable that he would take up more space. When she walked past the man, she accidentally squeezed him and stepped on his foot. But unexpectedly, this made this guy angry. After seeing that Jiang Hai stepped on him, he didn't mean to apologize. This person instantly stretched out his hand and grabbed Jiang Hai's coat. Feeling that someone was grabbing him, Jiang Hai also looked back. "Hey, you stepped on me." Seeing Jiang Hai, this person said loudly, but he spoke in Korean, and Jiang Hai couldn't understand. "I don't understand what you're talking about. What's the matter?" Looking at the hand that was still grabbing him, Jiang Hai frowned and spoke to him in English. After all, South Korea used to be stationed in the United States, so they still taught English very seriously. Although the intonation was a bit strange, at least, he understood what Jiang Hai said. "Foreigner? Humph. Idiot." After hearing Jiang Hai's words, this person was stunned for a moment, then he let go of his hand. One of the good things about South Korea's celebrities was that they were very sensible in front of others. After all, they represented the face of the country. Especially when facing foreigners. If it was South Korea, they might hate Japanese people the most. After all, in World War II, Japanese people harmed Korea more than Wuxia. But now, if South Korea's artists choose to perform abroad, their first choice would always be Japanese. So, don't talk about whether they were shameless or not. This was the essence of this country. However, although he wouldn't openly clash with foreigners, he still muttered in a low voice. But he didn't expect that Jiang Hai had someone here who could understand Korean. At this time, Cheryl Lee, who had been beside Jiang Hai, walked out first, glared at this man and said loudly, "Who are you calling an idiot, you pig?" Hearing Cheryl's pure Korean, this person was stunned for a moment, then he reacted. This woman was scolding him, so he wanted to teach her a lesson with a fierce look. In South Korea, male chauvinism prevailed. If a woman scolded a man on the street, it was easy to have a conflict. Seeing this person walking over with a fierce look, Jiang Hai also stepped forward and blocked in front of this person. At the same time, he pulled Cheryl behind him. Chapter 822. Looking at Jiang Hai who stood in front of him, this person couldn't help but feel a little weak. Jiang Hai was originally 186 meters tall, but since he got the Dragon Balls, he went through a second growth. Now he is 196 meters tall. His weight is 115 kilograms, which is 230 kilograms, but it's not very obvious because it's all muscle. In addition, he likes to eat beef, so it's not like the traditional streamlined muscles of Wuxia, such as Bruce Lee's. His muscles are very big, but they are somewhat similar to those of European and American people, but not the kind that uses protein powder. His arm is thicker than his head. Jiang Hai's arm is indeed not thin, but it's not thicker than his head. Speaking of which, it's a bit like Gua de Statham or Baldy Diesel, but his body is still a lot stronger than ordinary people. As soon as he walked in front of this person was a little scared. This person's height is about 1.8 meters, which is half a head shorter than Jiang Hai, and his body is also 2 times smaller. In addition, Jiang Hai is a foreigner, so he is also a little embarrassed. At this time, there are also some sharp-eyed fans who noticed the situation in the encirclement and couldn't help but feel a little excited. At this time, a man wearing glasses walked in front of this person and whispered to him. This person glanced at Jiang Hai and was about to leave, but Jiang Hai won't let him go easily. "Kid, aren't you very arrogant? Why are you leaving?" Seeing this guy still dare to be rude to him, Jiang Hai immediately grabbed this person's collar, and seeing Jiang Hai make a move, the others around him immediately rushed towards Jiang Hai. Of course, they didn't come here to fight, but to separate Jiang Hai and the others, but the people behind Jiang Hai are not to be trifled with. Azalina, Galina, Hua Lizi, and 2 bodyguards almost made a move at the same time, but unlike Azalina, Galina, and Hua Lizi, these 3 people directly defeated their opponents in an instant, while the other 2 people just fought with their opponents. Although they have the upper hand, they didn't solve the problem so quickly. Kyo seems to be beaten. Seeing the people in the circle seem to have made a move, some fans also shouted at this time. As a result, more than 100 people outside seemed to have gone crazy. They rushed into the inner circle crazily. The security guards there couldn't stop them anymore. But at this moment, suddenly, several black cars came from a distance and stopped outside these people. Then, a group of men in black jumped out of the car and quickly ran to the crowd. While separating the crowd, they escorted a middle-aged man into the inner circle. The fans on this side were originally very agitated, but after these people joined in, they instantly forced themselves to calm down. This was because the person in the lead had already revealed his gun when he separated the crowd. Although there were hundreds of fans and they were all very brainless, they were not so brainless that they would send themselves to their deaths. The people in front had calmed down, and the people behind had also been forcefully pushed aside. This made the security guards breathe a sigh of relief. If there was a stampede here, they would also be responsible for it. The middle-aged man didn't care whether these security guards were relieved or not. When he saw Jiang Hai standing there intact, he was the most relieved person. Under the escort of the men in black, he walked into the circle of these security guards and came to Jiang Hai with a smile on his face. He bowed without saying a word, completely ignoring the man who was still being pulled by Jiang Hai by the collar. "You are here, we just went to the airport to pick you up, but after arriving, I learned that the tower gave you an order to come out personally. I'm really sorry, I'm very sorry." Looking at Jiang Hai, the middle-aged man said to Jiang Hai with a smile on his face. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai frowned. It seems that this is the person who came to pick him up. Although Jiang Hai doesn't know this person, the man in Jiang Hai's hand is very familiar with this person. This was because he often saw this person on TV. This person was an absolute high official on the second level of the pyramid in South Korea. At this moment, he was quite confused. He could not understand at all why this high official in his eyes would come to curry favor with this countryman in front of him. Could it be that this person's identity was very important? Thinking of this, a few drops of cold sweat appeared on his forehead. "Sorry, there's no need. You'd better deal with the situation here. I think your country doesn't seem to welcome me very much. As soon as I come out, you want to beat me up. How about I go back first?" Seeing this person come, Jiang Hai glanced at the guy in his hand indifferently, then threw him directly to his subordinates, clapped his hands, and pointed at him with contempt. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, this person still had a smile on his face, but when he looked at this guy, he couldn't help but reveal a trace of murderous intent. If it is really because of this guy, Jiang Hai will go back, then he will kill this guy. Seeing this person's gaze, this made the legs of some of the people who were already weak after being mentioned by Jiang Hai for a long time become even weaker. The reason why he glared at this guy was mainly because that batch of goods was actually seized by him. When he detained the money, it was naturally an order from the higher-ups. However, when Jiang Hai turned the tables, the people from South Korea abandoned him and told him that this matter had nothing to do with South Korea. South Korea would participate in the negotiations, but if he really wanted compensation, then he should pay for it himself. $100 million, 120 billion won. Even if this person was not a bandit, he still couldn't come up with that much money. If he really has to pay so much money, then he will really have to die with this guy. Don't worry, no one will not welcome your arrival. I will take care of these small matters for you. I haven't introduced myself yet. My name is Li Shihui, and I'm mainly responsible for all the affairs of your visit to South Korea this time. After glaring at this guy, the man said with a smile. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai also smiled, then waved to the crowd and walked out of the crowd. Seeing Jiang Hai walk out, the men in black naturally formed a path for Jiang Hai to pass. On the other side, Li Shihui naturally followed with a smile on his face. He was afraid that he would make a move that would annoy Jiang Hai. Those who were in conflict with Jiang Hai also stopped at this time and watched Jiang Hai leave the crowd. After Jiang Hai and the others got in the car, a man in black walked over from a distance and waved at the guy and his manager who were still in a daze. The two immediately left the fan group and got into a car. The man then got into another car. After getting in the car, the atmosphere in the whole car was quite cold. I'm really sorry for causing trouble for you. It had to be admitted that the people of South Korea were quite flexible, especially this male artist. As soon as he saw that the atmosphere was not right, he immediately lowered his head and admitted his mistake. Li Xingji, right. If you want to apologize, don't say it to me, because you didn't offend me. That man is a distinguished guest of our South Korea. I see that you are also a well-known artist here. If you don't get his forgiveness before he leaves South Korea, then don't blame us. Looking at the guy in front of him, oh no, it's Li Xingji, a trace of anger flashed in the eyes of the man in black. What a joke, his fate and Li Shihuai's fate are connected. If Li Shihui is finished, then he is finished. No one knows better than them about Jiang Hai's position in their hearts now. I understand. Please tell me about that honorable guest. As soon as he heard this, Li Xingji knew that he stepped on a landmine this time, but fortunately, the great reputation he made at the beginning still has some effect, and there is a chance. That person is called Jiang Hai, Wuxia, and he is currently opening a manor in the United States. Hearing his words, the man also said very plainly. Ah. A Wuxia man, opening a manor in the United States? That. Hearing this, Li Xingji was dumbfounded. Whether it was in Wuxia or Korean customs, a cattle breeder wasn't considered a social celebrity. How much money could a cattle breeder have? Why did the domestic leaders pay so much attention to him? Don't think of him as an ordinary manor lord. What he earns in a year is more than what you can earn in 10 lifetimes. Let me tell you, let's not talk about his beef and fish. Just the grass he sold a few days ago, he earned $2 billion in 1 year. He's here this time because of some political matters. If you dare make him unhappy, we'll make your family cry. Looking at Li Xingji's eyes, the man in front of him naturally knew what he was thinking. It seemed that Li Xingji hadn't been beaten enough. So, the man was about to reveal a little information about Jiang Hai. After hearing what he said, Li Xingji was indeed dumbfounded. $2 billion from selling grass. And it was dollars. Assuming that $1 could be exchanged for 1,200 won, how much was 2 billion? Li Xingji had been famous for a few years now, but his net worth didn't even add up to 5 billion won. Everyone who paid attention to Korean entertainment companies knew how ruthless the commission was. Indeed, as the man said, what Jiang Hai earned in a year was more than he could earn in 10 lifetimes. Thinking this, he couldn't help but shudder. How could he ask for Jiang Hai's forgiveness? That was also a problem. At that moment, Jiang Hai didn't know what the man was thinking. All he knew was that he wouldn't care. Asking him to forgive someone? It was a little difficult. Who in the world didn't know that he was narrow-minded? He could only say that there was no such thing as a saint. Chapter 8:23. Now we're going to Shilla Hotel. I've booked a luxurious suite for you. It's also the best hotel in Seoul. I hope you can have a good rest. After getting into the car, Jiang Hai and the others were pulled by these people to their destination. Maybe it was because they were afraid of Jiang Hai, but the person in charge of receiving Jiang Hai was very careful. Of course, Jiang Hai didn't know that if the negotiation didn't go well this time, the person in front of him would have to pay the $100 million. It would be strange if he didn't curry favor with Jiang Hai. Oh, okay. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai nodded and said calmly. Then he began to look at the night scenery outside. Incheon wasn't too far from Seoul. There were 2 airports in Seoul. One was Gimpo, but it only flew to Seoul. But to be honest, it wasn't flying at all. How big was South Korea? So, the so-called planes there were more to Jeju Island, and the planes going to other countries all went from Incheon. From Incheon to Seoul, it only took a little more than an hour. Moreover, these people had license plates, so no one would say anything even if they sped up and ran red lights. After getting off the highway, they arrived at the capital of South Korea, Seoul Special City. In fact, for Wuxia people, they were more used to calling this city Seoul. But South Korea's pride didn't allow them to call it Seoul, because Seoul could be considered an ancient name. At that time, the capital was Pyongyang. Korea was different from Wuxia. Wuxia had a large territory and a long history. There were many places that could be used as the capital. The capital, Nandu, Sidu, and even Ryukong used to be the capital, but Korea couldn't. Since ancient times, Pyongyang was the capital of Korea. Although Seoul was also very important and was known as one of the 3 capitals, it wasn't that important. It was just a city. It wasn't until 2005 that Seoul officially changed its name to Seoul. This city could be said to be one of the most crowded cities in the world. Jiang Hai already learned that South Korea has a total of 30 million people, and Seoul has 10 million people. In other words, there are 10 million people living in this city, and there are also many people who live in other places but work in Seoul. It could be said that this capital supported 2/3 of the people in South Korea. This was no joke. Because of this, the periphery of the city was very large. Not long after they got off the highway, Jiang Hai saw a lot of buildings. Cheryl Lee sat beside Jiang Hai and introduced Jiang Hai to the nearby scenic spots. She also told Jiang Hai what was fun and delicious in South Korea. She knew that Jiang Hai was interested in these things, so she tried her best to explain. Li Shihuai on the opposite side wanted to speak several times, but he couldn't get a word in. Jiang Hai naturally saw the scene, but he wasn't kind enough to help this guy out. For Jiang Hai, he came this time to denounce these people. How could he be kind enough to give these guys a good face? Finally, when Cheryl Lee said that she was tired and was drinking water, Li Shihuai found an opportunity. That, Mr. Jiang Hai, my boss asked me to ask you when you have time. We can negotiate as soon as possible. Looking at Jiang Hai, the man said seriously. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai pretended not to hear. Seeing Jiang Hai's appearance, Li Shihuai couldn't help but smile bitterly. He naturally knew that Jiang Hai was just pretending. The car was very quiet, and his voice wasn't soft just now. He could see that this man was not easy to serve. But no matter how hard it was to serve him, he still had to serve him. After all, if Jiang Hai wasn't happy, he could just leave now. Not only would he not be able to report to his superiors, but the South Korea government would also not forgive him. After all, this would damage their international image, and he would be the best scapegoat for that person. At the same time, he wouldn't be able to pay back the $100 million that Jiang Hai demanded in compensation. At that time, he would have no other choice but to die. For his own life, for his own future, and for his family, he had to endure this. As long as Jiang Hai was happy, he would do anything. The most important thing now was to build a good relationship with Jiang Hai. That, Mr. Jiang Hai, what do you think of my suggestion just now? He braced himself. Since Jiang Hai was ignoring him, he had to do it. With a smile on his face, he looked at Jiang Hai eagerly and continued to ask him. What's the rush? I just got here. No matter what, I'll have to play for a few days first. Hearing this, Jiang Hai smiled disdainfully. Did he think he was so easy to deal with? He wanted these people to know what it meant to say that it was easy to invite a god, but difficult to send him away. Mr. Jiang, this is really too late. I'll tell you the truth, the person who detained your plane was me, but I was ordered to do so by the higher-ups. Now that you said you wanted $100 million in compensation, the higher-ups gave up on me. They said that if you want compensation, I'll be responsible for the money, but where do I have 120 billion Korean won? My entire net worth is less than 10 billion. If you really want me to compensate, I can only die. Looking at Jiang Hai's calm expression, the man spoke in a low voice with a helpless expression. He was begging for mercy and pretending to be pitiful. But what he got in return was only Jiang Hai's indifferent smile. What did his death have to do with Jiang Hai? What does this have to do with me? Mr. Lee? Looking at him indifferently, Jiang Hai smiled disdainfully. I was rude. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, a trace of anger flashed across the man's face at first, but then it disappeared. He knew that he couldn't threaten Jiang Hai. The only thing he could do was to beg Jiang Hai to be merciful. He was now desperately thinking about how he could please Jiang Hai. At this time, he glanced at Cheryl Lee who was sitting on Jiang Hai's left, Hua Lizzie who was sitting on the right, Azalina who was sitting in the front passenger seat, and Galina who was sitting in the car behind. He seemed to know Jiang Hai's weakness. As for what weakness? Was there a need to say it? It was a weakness that all men had. It was like this: I don't know what Mr. Jiang Hai knows about our country's culture. Since he had made up his mind to please Jiang Hai shamelessly, he had to cater to his tastes. Since Jiang Hai liked women, he had to lead this topic up. I'm from the northeast, Bingcheng, so I know a little about this country. Barbecue, cold noodles, plastic surgery, Korean dramas. Hearing this person's words, Jiang Hai still answered him because it had nothing to do with business. However, after thinking about it, he could only think of these things. As for the rest, such as shameless, shameless, the universe is yours, and so on, Jiang Hai didn't say them out loud. The self-esteem of this nation was quite abnormal. If he said it out loud, they would fight him to the death, and it would be troublesome. Yes, the food in South Korea is quite good. I've also prepared our most famous Korean food for you tonight. You can have a good taste. As for Korean dramas, this is also our culture. I don't know if Mr. Jiang has a favorite girl group or celebrity. Hearing Jiang Hai's answer, Li Shihui also laughed. This was a good start. He was afraid that Jiang Hai would ignore him. As long as Jiang Hai ignored him and had a bad attitude, he could tolerate it. Girl group? I don't know. To be honest, in my opinion, Korean female celebrities all look the same. Jiang Hai was already very polite by not mentioning their faces. He remembered that there was a joke on the internet. It said that a few Wuxia men who married foreigners were chatting together. Some said that after marrying a woman from India, they found out that the status of Indian women was so low. Some said that after marrying a woman from Russia, they found out that Russian women could be so fat after marriage. In the end, the man who married South Korea said that after marrying a woman from South Korea, he found out that marrying a woman from South Korea was like marrying a woman from the whole country. Jiang Hai didn't have a good impression of South Korea from the bottom of his heart. Therefore, he didn't have a good impression of those women from this country who were coquettish. Moreover, there were often bad rumors about them on the internet. As for those Korean dramas, he wouldn't watch them. Only old ladies and middle-aged women would like to watch those things. Jiang Hai liked to watch comedies. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Li Shihui couldn't help but wipe his sweat. Jiang Hai's answer seemed to make him unable to intervene. You really don't know about South Korea's girl group? Although I can't tell them apart, I still know some of the representative ones. You don't know any of them? But before he could speak, Cheryl Lee spoke first. I really don't know. I don't pay attention to these things. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai really didn't pay attention to these things. Even if you don't pay attention to them, you should have heard of their songs. Their songs are quite popular in Asia. It's called Nobody, Wonder Girls. Cheryl Lee said as she sang a few lines and gestured. Oh, I know this song, but those people are a little ugly. Jiang Hai thought for a moment. He had indeed heard this song. After all, it was really popular at that time. It was played in the streets and alleys. Jiang Hai also heard it, but he didn't know how to sing it. Che, I remember that song is also very popular. It's that Jejejej. Girls' Generation. Hearing Jiang Hai say this, Cheryl Lee couldn't help but look at Jiang Hai contemptuously, then gestured there. Oh, I know this too, but I didn't look carefully. Do they all look the same? Hearing this music, Jiang Hai also clapped his hands. He also remembered this, but he couldn't remember what those singers looked like. Chapter 8:24. Jiang Hai wasn't very interested in Korean stuff. He didn't like girl groups, Korean dramas, and so on. Especially some Korean stars who insulted China. Jiang Hai naturally disliked them even more. He used to be one of the keyboard warriors who crusaded against these people on the internet. But it was impossible for him to stop so many people from liking him. Especially some brainless little girls and middle-aged and elderly women. Thinking back, when Jiang Hai's grandmother was still alive, she especially liked to watch Korean dramas because she liked to watch those Zhang family and Li family short stories. Later on, when he went to school, one of his roommates especially liked those Korean girl bands. Of course, he wasn't a true fan. If he counted, he was probably a true fan of the legs. The dance of the Korean girl bands, you know. That era seemed to be the era of thighs, oh no, the era of ants, the era of young girls. It was the most popular time. In Jiang Hai's dormitory when he went to school, every day was despicable, 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 or oh. So Jiang Hai also heard some of it. He wasn't the kind of person who would stop others from liking something he didn't like. From what he had seen and heard, he also knew about this group. But to be honest, he had also seen the music video, but he couldn't tell who those people were at all. At most, he could tell their height, their hair color, and so on. As for the resemblance, well, Jiang Hai could only laugh. Not all South Koreans had undergone plastic surgery. Just like how there were good people in Japan, there were also good people in South Korea. However, it was difficult to distinguish them. Oh, it's good that you know, it's good that you know. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Li Shihui couldn't help but wipe his sweat and then laughed a few words. For him, as long as Jiang Hai knew, this was the most important thing. After that, he stopped talking and picked up his phone to send a text message. On the other side, Cheryl Lee was introducing Seoul to Jiang Hai. Since Jiang Hai said that he wanted to stay here for a few days, he naturally had to go to those scenic spots. Cheryl Lee was also introducing him to Seoul. There weren't many places to play in Seoul. Their first choice was those palaces and the like. However, Jiang Hai and the others had been to the imperial capital's Forbidden City before. What's so fun about Seoul? Next was Ledian World. This was an amusement park, so Jiang Hai wasn't interested in it. South Hill Park is a sacred place for couples in Seoul. But Jiang Hai only feels that it is a place for couples. However, since they were already here, it was impossible for them to not go anywhere. Although they looked down on this country, they couldn't just not go anywhere since they were already here. Therefore, Jiang Hai was still discussing with Cheryl Lee where they should go to play these few days. Soon, the motorcade arrived at the Shilla Hotel in Seoul. The Shilla Hotel was a hotel under the Seoul Samsung Group. It was one of the top 2 hotels in Korea. The only one that could compete with it was the Lotte Hotel in Busan. I won't introduce the Shilla Hotel here. Anyway, for Jiang Hai, this was just a way to make up the word count. The current plot was quite smooth, so he was too lazy to use these things to make up the word count. It was easy to interrupt the flow of the plot. The car stopped in front of the Shilla Hotel, and a special doorman came to open the door. Then, Jiang Hai and the rest went directly to the elevator and went to the room specially prepared for them in South Korea. Jiang Hai lived in a suite with South Korean characteristics. This was a 5-bedroom room. 3 of the rooms were occupied. Each room had a separate bathroom, an independent air conditioner, a TV, and a small balcony. There were also 2 rooms. One was a study room, and the other was a game room. There were a lot of game consoles and the like. Jiang Hai's master bedroom was quite big, but what surprised Jiang Hai was that there was no bed in the master bedroom. South Korea and Japan were very similar in one thing. Although they both learned from Wuxia, they liked to sleep on rice. A house with South Korean characteristics naturally needed to sleep on rice. Once the quilt was spread out, the entire room would be a bed. This made Jiang Hai very surprised and happy. Originally, he was thinking that if he and the 4 girls did it together, if the bed was too small, then they wouldn't be able to move around freely. But now, the whole room was their battlefield. After taking a look, Jiang Hai also felt that this thing was quite novel. After walking around the room, he left the room. This suite was specially prepared for him, Azalina, Galina, Wallace, and Cheryl Lee. Naturally, the others couldn't stay here. They had their own guest rooms on the same floor, so it was quite convenient. After everyone had settled down, Jiang Hai, Azalina, and Cheryl went to participate in the banquet prepared by Li Shihui. As for Hua Lizzie and Galina, they had to decorate their rooms. They couldn't trust anyone else. As for Jiang Hai and the others, they went to the banquet hall specially prepared by Shilla Hotel. Jiang Hai's subordinates naturally had their own banquet, while Jiang Hai and the others sat alone in a large room. This restaurant, which seemed to be able to seat about 20 people, only had Jiang Hai and the others. Jiang Hai and the other 2 people brought by Li Shihui. For this meal, Jiang Hai and the others paid attention to the dining system. In other words, Jiang Hai and the others each had a long table in front of them. After they arrived, Li Shihui clapped his hands to signal that the dishes were served. Then, many waiters came in and placed all kinds of dishes in front of Jiang Hai. This is our country's national cuisine. This is our country's unique handing food. In ancient times, it was exclusively for the monarch's palace cuisine. Later, it was liberalized, and it was relegated to the scholar officials class. Recently, we have democracy, so this way of eating is also widely spread among the people. However, the average civilian eats 3, 6, 9, and 12. What we are eating now is the highest grade of Chuanzhou handing food. There are 18 kinds of kimchi, 6 kinds of seafood, 6 kinds of meat, 6 kinds of vegetables, and 6 kinds of fruits. Please taste it well. Looking at the dishes here, Li Shihui also put on a smile and said to Jiang Hai. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also picked up his chopsticks and glanced at the dishes that were being served. There were indeed many types of dishes, but the portions, Jiang Hai was sure that as long as he opened his mouth a little wider, he could eat a portion in one bite. After the dishes were all served, it was indeed a big table, but to be honest, Jiang Hai didn't feel that there was anything vulgar about it. He picked up his chopsticks and picked a few to take a look. Basically, he knew everything on the table. On the periphery were 18 kimchi. It had to be said that the southern Gauls really liked kimchi. Speaking of Korean kimchi, the first thing that came to mind was spicy cabbage. This was a necessity. The spicy cabbage was the most eye-catching. At the same time, there were 3 types of kimchi. The spicy cabbage that Jiang Hai was more familiar with was the spicy cabbage, the pickled cabbage, and the red soup cabbage. Next, there were pickled cucumbers, pickled radishes, pickled pickles, 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 pickles, carrot pickles, and so on. As for the seafood, Jiang Hai didn't have much of an appetite. Crabs in soy sauce and live octopus. Other than that, there was a grilled fish, a stewed fish, a bowl of seafood soup, and a spoon. There were 6 types of seafood. Among the 6 types of meat, 5 of them were grilled meat. There was grilled marble beef, which seemed to be the legendary Korean beef. There was also grilled pork belly, grilled pork, grilled steak, grilled lamb chops, and stewed beef. These were 6 types of meat. Lastly, the vegetables and fruits were all stir-fried. Those dishes were mainly used to wrap the grilled meat. Other than that, there was a small bowl of rice. This was the so-called Korean cuisine. Looking at the food in front of him, Jiang Hai felt that the former king of Wuxia had a tough life. This kind of food, although compared to the Wuxia's emperors, it was still far from being comparable to the Wuxia's ministers and rich people. But to be honest, Jiang Hai was treating them to the best food here. Although he was used to eating the beef, fish, pork, and vegetables he grew, he didn't feel like eating them. But if it wasn't too strange, he would still eat it. Thinking of this, he also moved his chopsticks, wanting to make do with the food and then go back to rest. However, just as he was about to start eating, someone knocked on the door of the private room. After getting permission, the door opened, and 2 women appeared outside the private room. Their breathing was obviously a little messy. When they saw the situation inside the private room, they couldn't help but let out a long sigh. We're really sorry, we're late because we had a job. Looking at Li Shihuai, the two immediately bowed 90 degrees, and then said with a serious face. Although Li Shihuai was like a grandson in front of Jiang Hai, in South Korea, except for a few people, everyone else was a grandson when they saw him. For example, the two people in front of him. Oh, it's okay. Come, let me introduce you. This is Jiang Hai, Mr. Jiang, a distinguished guest of our country. Hearing these two people, Li Shihuai nodded lightly, then took the initiative to stand up and introduce Jiang Hai, who was sitting in the main seat. Mr. Jiang, hello, Smita. We are girls' generations Kim Taeyeon, Lin Yun, Smita. Please take care of us. Hearing Li Shihuai's words, the two women were also very sensible. They immediately bowed to Jiang Hai and then said seriously. But Jiang Hai was a little confused. He was confused, naturally not because he saw his idol and didn't know what to do, but because he didn't understand. Chapter 825. Mr. Jiang is from Wuxia, not Korea, so you can speak Chinese or English to him. Seeing Jiang Hai's confused look, Cheryl Li also came over and translated into his ear. As for Li Shihuai, he immediately explained to the two puzzled women. After hearing this, the two women revealed a look of understanding, but then their faces became a little embarrassed. All right. Let's go. Let's go. Because in their group, some of them learned Chinese, some of them were good at English, and many of them came back from the United States. But the two of them were born and raised in South Korea. The so-called Chinese and English were only limited to introducing themselves. For general conversations, English was fine, but they almost couldn't speak Chinese. The most important thing was that everyone in South Korea knew it. The English they spoke may not be understood by foreigners because the accent was indeed a little strange. Hello, my name is Kim Taeyeon, Lin Yun, we are from Girls' Generation. Looking at Jiang Hai, the two had to bite the bullet and introduce themselves with a serious face. Listening to their stiff Chinese, Jiang Hai also nodded. Oh, I see, hello. Glancing at the two, Jiang Hai also nodded and said in English. Hearing Jiang Hai's reply, the two were relieved, and then nodded again as a return of courtesy. Mr. Jiang Hai is a very important friend of our country. Because he doesn't know much about our South Korean culture, the only people who know are you. In order to get closer to him, he specially asked the two of you to help communicate. I think your company should have made it very clear. Hearing their words, Li Shihuai also said seriously. Hearing his words, the faces of the two were quite distressed. In fact, they really didn't want to come. What bridge of communication and so on, do you really think they don't understand? They are already in their 20s, almost 30. They knew better than anyone else what they were doing here. They were just here to drink with him. As for what they would do after drinking, that would depend on Jiang Hai's mood. Thinking of this, the two of them could not help but feel a little sad. After all, they were no longer so-called trainees. Although they were no longer at their peak, they were still at their peak. They had a large number of fans all over the world. However, South Korea's idol economy was like this, especially the girl groups. They were people who relied on youth to make a living. The entire South Korea market was only so big. When you were old and could not attract the mainstream group of 16 or 17-year-old girls, other girl groups would naturally rise up and become the new A-list idols. As for people like them who had once been glorious, it was inevitable that they would be pushed back. However, to be honest, the two of them did not mind being pushed back because they had already considered the problem of the future when they were glorious. Currently, the two of them were solo and their results were not bad. The other one specialized in acting. She originally wanted to develop the distant mainland of Wuxia, and did well in the early stages. However, after Wuxia recently issued a ban on South Korean stars, the acting girl's life instantly became difficult. However, based on what they had accumulated in the past, they did not have to worry about not being able to make money at all when they went for commercial performances. At most, they would earn less than in previous years, that was all. Therefore, even if there were some people who needed to entertain in the management company, even if they were domestic high-ranking officials, they could completely ignore them. However, today was different because Li Shihui had used the face of South Korea to find their company. If they did not come or angered these people, it would not just be a matter of being banned from the entertainment industry. Especially Li Shihui in front of them. As he said just now, he was a grandson in front of Jiang Hai, because Jiang Hai could ask him for $100 million at any time, but in the eyes of outsiders, he was a grandfather. This was an existence that could not be disobeyed. After receiving the text message, the company's representative even specially called the higher-ups. After all, they still had face. However, the higher-ups actually said that if Jiang Hai took a fancy to them, it would be their blessing. They could become the bridge between South Korea and Jiang Hai. That could not be better. After learning that the higher-ups meant this, the representative gave up and had no choice but to send them over. Because if they did not comply, they might face more than just being kicked out of the entertainment industry. Yes, we understand. Hearing Li Shihuai's words, Kim Taiyan lowered her head helplessly. They definitely had to come, but they were unwilling to give themselves up like this, but what could they do? They could only take one step at a time. Thinking of this, she could only bite her lip and say in a deep voice, "Come, sit next to Mr. Jiang Hai." Hearing her words, Li Shihui couldn't help but smile, then motioned for them to sit over. Hearing Li Shihuai's words, the two slowly walked in, then knelt on both sides of Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai was also a little confused when these two suddenly sat next to him. However, Jiang Hai understood what this guy meant, but was he so easy to get rid of? "I think Mr. Li, are you misunderstanding something? I don't have high paraplegia, so I don't seem to need others to feed me." Looking at the two people sitting on both sides, Jiang Hai also chuckled, then picked up the teacup in front of him, took a sip of tea, and said to Li Shihui. He didn't buy it. Although a dragon's nature was something. But that was only when something was about to happen. Now, two people were suddenly stuffed to him, and he didn't know who they were. How could Jiang Hai feel anything? No, I didn't mean that at all. I asked these two to come here mainly because you don't know much about our country, so it's easier to communicate with two people who you know a little about. At the same time, I can see that you don't know much about our food, so I need someone to introduce you. This is Miss Cheryl Lee. At first glance, I can tell that she has been abroad for a long time. She may not have the ability to do so. Seeing Jiang Hai say so, Li Shihui immediately said. But when he said the first half of the sentence, he found that Cheryl Lee wanted to refute him, so he immediately said the next sentence to block her words. Seeing that Cheryl Lee didn't speak, Jiang Hai also glanced at Li Shihui, then nodded. He naturally understood what this guy wanted to do, but he didn't need to object, right? Jiang Hai also looked at the two people beside him. One of them was small, and the other had long black hair. As for whether they looked alike, Jiang Hai didn't comment. Although a dragon's nature was something, it was impossible for him to go berserk with such thick clothes. Seeing that Jiang Hai didn't object, Li Shihui also gestured to the two people. Seeing Li Shihui's gaze, the small one picked up the teacup and poured water for Jiang Hai, while the long black hair picked up the lettuce and wrapped it up for Jiang Hai. But when Jiang Hai saw the thing she wrapped up, he, who originally didn't have much appetite, lost his appetite even more. He saw that this woman had put whole cloves of garlic, perilla leaves, barbecued meat, rice, chili, grilled fish, and live octopus on top of the rice. She then mixed it with some barbecued meat sauce. Just like that, she was done. Although Jiang Hai wasn't a person who was obsessed with food, he didn't pay attention to the color, smell, and taste of food. After all, his favorite northeastern stew wasn't good looking, but what the hell was this? It was an insult to the darkness to call it dark cuisine. Wait a minute, this thing? How do you eat it? Jiang Hai waved his hand to stop the person from feeding him and asked her. Just eat it like this. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the woman froze for a moment. She blinked her big eyes and looked at Jiang Hai innocently. Looking at her, Jiang Hai really choked. Just eat it like this? Try it and let me see. Looking at her, Jiang Hai said to her. Oh. But it could be seen that she didn't seem to hear the dissatisfaction and ridicule in Jiang Hai's words. Instead, she directly stuffed the vegetable bun into her mouth. Then, as if she had eaten something delicious, she narrowed her eyes and made a sound of N. What the hell is this? Looking at her, Jiang Hai was completely confused. How can that thing be delicious? He didn't read much, so don't lie to him. Cough, that's how we eat in South Korea. Looking at Jiang Hai's face that was filled with a blank 13, Cheryl Lee awkwardly said. To be honest, when she came back a few days ago, she was also very surprised, but this is indeed how South Koreans eat this thing, it just looks a little scary. Hee hee, you guys eat it yourselves. I'll just eat something casually. I don't have the habit of being fed by others. Looking at the two, Jiang Hai said awkwardly. Then, he picked up a bowl of rice, dipped the roasted beef in barbecue sauce, and ate it just like that. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the two people here also glanced at Li Shihuai. How could Li Shihuai not see it at this time? Jiang Hai didn't like to eat these things. After reviewing this failed dinner party in his heart, he continued to say something with a smile. After the two saw that Li Shihuai didn't stop them, they also ate some things. To be honest, the meal prepared by Li Shihuai could definitely be regarded as the top delicacies in South Korea. No matter what the arrangement will be later, these two people have to eat until they are full. Especially the long straight black hair over there, the speed and appearance of eating scared Jiang Hai. Have they not eaten for a long time? Chapter 8:26. The dinner ended quickly. Jiang Hai got up and nodded at Li Shihuai, then returned to his suite with the other two. Jean Taiyan and Lin Yun, who had been eating just now, seemed to have realized that they weren't here to eat. For a moment, they were a little dazed. You two, come out with me for a moment. Looking at the two in front of him, Li Shihuai said with a cold face. Then, he led the two out of the room, to the elevator door, and found a place where they couldn't see each other. I think your superiors have already told you why you're here this time, right? The two people on the other side, one was guarding the elevator, and the other was guarding the front. Li Shihuai looked at the two people in front of him with a serious face. Yes, when we came, the representative accompanied us to eat with a guest. Hearing his words, Jean Taiyan braced herself and said. Hearing her words, Li Shihuai's face turned even uglier. Eat? Do I need you to eat with me? You're here to sleep with him. Don't say you don't know what this means. Hearing Jean Taikai's words, Li Shihuai directly interrupted her and roared at them in a low voice. We don't want to do this. Glancing at Li Shihuai, Jean Taiyan said with a little stubbornness. Now, it's not a matter of whether you want to or not, but a matter of whether you have to do this. This is a mission given to you by the higher-ups of South Korea. Do you know who that person is? He's Jiang Hai. If you watch the news, you should know that our country recently detained a plane of that person, and the beef on the plane is worth $100 million. $100 million, do you understand what that means? That kind of chilled beef is guaranteed to last for 7 days. Today is already the 3rd day. In other words, we still have 3 days to transfer the beef to him. Otherwise, we don't have to pay $100 million. $100 million. Looking at the two people in front of him, Li Shihuai was already a little hysterical. He absolutely couldn't accept this. Of course, in his words, he also changed the fact that he had to pay $100 million to the country. $100 million? Hearing the words of the person in front of them, Kim Taeyin and Lin Yuner were a little dazed. 120 billion won, oh my god, that man just now didn't seem to be such a powerful existence. Let me tell you, you can accompany him. This is your good fortune. That guy has a manor that earns him more than $2 billion a year from raising cattle, which is 2.4 trillion won. He earns about the same amount from selling fish, and now he's also selling grass. His annual income is definitely more than $6 billion. Because his company and manor are both private, Forbes can't estimate his net worth. But according to the evaluation of people in our country, as long as his manor continues to operate, his net worth can already be in the top 10 in the world. Letting you serve him is a chance for you to think about your future while he knows about you. Li Shihuai tugged at his tie. Obviously, this guy was very familiar with using the method of giving a slap and then giving a sweet date. He used both soft and hard methods. But Hearing Li Shihuai's words, the two women looked at each other. Although they really didn't expect Jiang Hai to be such a rich person, they still couldn't accept offering themselves like this. Bullshit. Let me tell you, I don't care what method you use. Tomorrow, you must let me see him at the negotiating table. You must. This is a political task. If you can't complete it tomorrow, you will not have a place in South Korea. No, not only you, but also your family and friends will not have a place in South Korea. Whether you will exist in the Han River depends on whether you can run away or not. Do you understand? When Li Shihuai heard that the two people in front of him were still hesitating, he instantly became furious. He grabbed their hair and roared with a face full of anger. Hearing Li Shihuai's roar, the two people were completely scared silly. However, they knew that this was not a threat, nor was it a threat. It was a notice. If they did not do as they were told, then they really would not have any foothold in South Korea. This guy in front of them had this ability and also had this ability. He was a man of his word. You guys stay here and watch them. If they don't do as I say, you know what will happen. Letting go of the two's hair, Li Shihuai snorted coldly and said to the two people next to him. After hearing Li Shihuai's words, the two nodded seriously and then stood there. Looking at the appearance of the two, Kim Tae-yen and Lin Yun understood that this time, they couldn't escape. In a country like South Korea, those rich people, trainees, or small celebrities, this could be said to be a very obvious thing. But they were different. From the moment they entered the company, they were the company's cash cow. Although they experienced some bad things later, such as the Black Sea incident, they had always been in the company's plan. Therefore, the company protected them very well in this aspect. After they became popular, naturally, no one dared to come over and ask them to do anything. Although their popularity had dropped now, no one could threaten them because they had grown wings and had money now. It was very difficult for topics like being banned from the entertainment industry to affect them. It could be said that except for the top existence in South Korea, no one could control their existence. But it was different now. Because now it wasn't those people who controlled them. Even though the Samsung Lee family had always joked that South Korea was the Samsung Lee family's South Korea, the Samsung Lee family didn't dare to go against the government in politics. It was even more impossible for them. Now, the whole of South Korea needed Jiang Hai's help. In the information they investigated, it was said that Jiang Hai was very fond of women. How could they not take advantage of it now? Under Li Shihuai's gaze, the two had no choice but to do it even if they didn't want to. They walked toward Jiang Hai's private room while looking back repeatedly. Now they were really scared and didn't have their own opinions, but what could they do? Uni, I'm scared. Lin Yuner, who was usually a carefree person, was also a little panicked at this time. However, she didn't realize that Jean Tae-yen was even more panicked. She didn't know if it was because of the makeup or something else, but her face had become even paler at this time, almost drained of blood. However, they still had to walk step by step toward Jiang Hai's room. It wasn't a long road. They walked for about 15 minutes before reaching it, but they still felt that the road was too short. After reaching it, they glanced at the distance. The two people were still guarding there. They had no choice but to use their trembling right hands to gently knock on the door in front of them. After a long while, the door opened. The foreign woman they saw just now appeared in front of the door. After seeing them, she frowned first, then relaxed. Obviously, she also understood the purpose of the two people here. Kamwang. She waved to the two people. The woman walked in first, and the two women also walked in slowly, looking back 3 times with each step. Then they closed the door and stood timidly at the door, looking around in horror. Why are you here? At this moment, the door of Jiang Hai's master bedroom opened. Jiang Hai, who had just taken a shower, walked out in a bathrobe. When he saw the two people, Jiang Hai was stunned. Ugh. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the two people were also stunned. How should they say it? They had never experienced it before. This is a gift from Li something today. Don't tell me you can't tell. At this time, Cheryl Li also walked out of Jiang Hai's master bedroom in a bathrobe. When she looked at Jean Taiyan and Lin Yuner, there was a trace of ridicule on her face. She was also present at the banquet just now. She naturally knew that the purpose of these two people here was nothing more than to serve Jiang Hai. I can see it, but I don't understand their expressions because their faces clearly say, I don't want to. Since they don't want to, why are they here? Hearing Cheryl Li's words, Jiang Hai shook his head, sat on the sofa in the living room, and then looked at the two people in front of him with some doubts. Not everyone in this world is as rich as you. There are some things that you can't do if you don't want to, right? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cheryl also walked to Jiang Hai's side with a smile, then sat on Jiang Hai's lap. At the same time, she winked at the two people, which was also a declaration of sovereignty. Sir Li said that he hopes that you can participate in the negotiation tomorrow. Hearing Cheryl's words, Jean Taiyan and Lin Yuner were about to cry. They looked at Jiang Hai with a pitiful expression. Fortunately, they still remembered why they came. If Jiang Hai was a good person and easy to talk to, perhaps they didn't need to do that kind of thing. But it was a pity that their thinking was still too simple. If Jiang Hai was really a good person, there wouldn't be such a scene now. I don't plan to go to the negotiation tomorrow. My plane has a total of 30 tons of beef. The wholesale price is about $20 million, and the profit price is about $40 million. But if I leave it there and let it rot, I can get $100 million. Even if I don't get 100 million, I'm confident that I can at least earn 80 million. Excluding legal fees and my own expenses, I still have a net profit of $30 million. Tell me, what reason do I have to give up this money? Shaking his head, Jiang Hai said calmly to the two people. And after hearing Jiang Hai's words, the two people's faces turned even uglier. You're tuning in to the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.